Chapter 382. When Yang Fan came to this place, he felt that every step he took, every reaction he took, were all within Princess Taiping's calculations. He felt somewhat annoyed. He straightened his chest and strode over. Because he was angry, his feet stomped hard on the wooden planks of the porch, making a pa, pa, pa sound. The little girl who was massaging Princess Taiping's legs glanced over and whispered something. Princess Taiping smiled and replied. The little girl then got down from the couch, lifted her skirt, and slipped away from Yang Fan's side. Looking at her appearance, the little girl seemed to be afraid of Yang Fan's aggressive expression. Princess Taiping was lying on the couch, but she looked at him with a smile. Her watery eyes were very charming. Yang Fan's face tightened. He strode over, stood still, and shouted in a deep voice, "Get up!" "Yo!" Princess Taiping patted her plump chest and said, as if she was frightened, "Your footsteps are so heavy and your voice is so loud. Are you trying to scare my fish away?" Right at this moment, the fishing float sank with a whiz sound, followed by a pull of the fishing line. Princess Taiping was busy talking to Yang Fan. The fishing rod slipped from her hand. Bang! It bounced on the floor and was dragged into the water by the big fish. "Aya, it's hooked! Quickly help me!" Princess Taiping shouted excitedly. Along the way, Yang Fan's every reaction was calculated by Princess Taiping. How could he believe her at this time? He thought that Princess Taiping was deliberately putting on an act. He folded his arms and looked at her with cold eyes. He wanted to see what kind of trick this peerless, enchanting woman was going to play. Seeing that he did not move, Princess Taiping angrily said, "You, this person!" While saying that, she stood up and tried to grab the fishing rod. The fishing rod was pulled by the big fish and slid into the water. Princess Taiping hastily moved forward and grabbed the tail of the fishing rod from the water surface. She lost her footing and fell into the water surface. "Hey, hey, hey!" Princess Taiping shouted and waved her empty left hand like a wheel. In the end, she still could not stabilize her body. Yang Fan was standing next to her. With his agility, he could easily grab Princess Taiping. But if he did that, the imposing manner and angry expression that he tried to put on would all be in vain. Yang Fan thought that this was part of Princess Taiping's plan, so he coldly folded his arms and looked at her. Princess Taiping fell into the water with a plop sound and immediately screamed. Princess Taiping was not good at swimming. As soon as she fell into the water, she cried out in panic, "Help!" Yang Fan squatted down beside her and watched her struggling in the water. He felt angry and funny at the same time. In order to scheme against him, this princess really put in a lot of effort. Seeing Princess Taiping screaming and struggling, Yang Fan couldn't help but say, "Are you done? Why don't you come up?" Princess Taiping did not pay attention to him. Her body was struggling further and further away from him. Yang Fan felt that something was wrong. The panic on Princess Taiping's face did not seem to be fake. More importantly, Yang Fan saw with his own eyes that Princess Taiping even drank 2 mouthfuls of water while struggling. No matter how much Princess Taiping pretended to deceive him, it was unlikely that she would drink the water from the pool. When Yang Fan saw that she was indeed drowning, he didn't bother to take off his clothes and jumped into the water to swim towards her. "Help! Help!" Yang Fan grabbed her body and said snappily, "Stand still, the water isn't that deep." There were even lotus flowers growing in the lake. How deep could the lake be? It was because Princess Taiping did not know how to swim that she panicked in the water and choked a few mouthfuls of water. If she was calmer, she would be able to stand up in the water, and the water would only reach her chest and abdomen. Princess Taiping was grabbed by the shoulders and shouted. Only then did she regain her composure. She suddenly realized that her feet were on the ground and the water was not that deep. She couldn't help but calm down a little. Yang Fan said, "Come, let's go ashore." At this time, Princess Taiping was hugging his body tightly in the water and had no idea what to do. When she heard what he said, she quickly nodded. but she only let go of Yang Fan a little. When she looked down, she suddenly saw her own appearance and couldn't help but let out a scream. Yang Fan impatiently said, "What are you screaming for?" Yang Fan followed Princess Taiping's gaze and was immediately speechless. At this time, although the midsummer had passed, the weather was still hot. Princess Taiping did not wear thick clothes. She only wore a thin layer of gown. Especially today, her clothes were white. They were light, soft, and of high quality. At first it was not obvious, but once it was wet, it was no different from not wearing anything. Her chest was trembling. No, it was not no different from not wearing anything. It was more tempting than not wearing anything. Fortunately, Yang Fan had seen her naked body under the light. Although this scene was sexy, it was not more attractive than that night. At this moment, Yang Fan was most worried that the servants of the Princess Palace would come. If they saw this scene, he would not be able to wash himself away, even if he jumped into the Luo River. Therefore, Yang Fan impolitely said, "Scream. What are you screaming for? Which part of your body have I not seen? Go. Quickly go ashore." Her Langjun was so unromantic that Princess Taiping could not help but pout. She was dragged by him and separated the lotus. Step by step they walked ashore. Although Princess Taiping was very courageous and had never been afraid to show her seductive body in front of him, this was in broad daylight. Moreover, wet clothes stuck to her body and she looked like a drowned rat. In Princess Taiping's eyes, it was not beautiful at all. Once ashore, she lifted her wet skirt and ran towards Zhuyu Pavilion. The clothes were wet, and not only was it transparent, it was also heavy, revealing her soft breasts and back. As she lifted her skirt and ran, her plump buttocks swayed like a ripe peach. Her breasts and buttocks came into view. When had Yang Fan ever seen a beautiful woman run naked? This time his eyes were really good as he watched her figure disappear into the pavilion. When her figure disappeared, Yang Fan came back to his senses. He hurriedly looked around but did not see anyone. He did not know that Princess Taiping had already ordered that if Yang Fan came, all the servants should leave. Those servants only knew that she was going to meet her lover, so naturally they would hide as far away as possible. Even if they wanted to have sex, they had to look at who the person was. How could they have the fortune to see Her Royal Highness's bed scene? Yang Fan wrung out the water from his clothes and shouted towards the pavilion, "Do you want someone to bring you a few sets of clothes?" Princess Taiping answered snappily, "I don't need it." After a while, Princess Taiping said, "Come in." Yang Fan hesitated for a moment before walking in. If he had seen the other party's naked body, there was nothing to be embarrassed about. Yang Fan walked into the Zhuyu Pavilion and saw Princess Taiping sitting on a couch. She was still wearing that thin robe and there was a puddle of water on the floor. It looked like she had wrung it out, although it still revealed the color of flesh. It was not like before where it did not have the slightest effect of concealment. Yang Fan entered the Zhuamun Pavilion and stood at the entrance. He looked at her snappily and said, "You didn't plan this in advance, right?" Princess Taiping wrung her clothes dry, and her demeanor immediately restored her usual grace. But her hair was also wet, and she had already pulled out the hairpin. Her beautiful black long hair draped over her chest and back. Her beautiful hair contrasted with her snow-white and tender face. She looked a little less magnificent and noble, but a little more delicate and elegant. She glanced at Yang Fan. Although she pretended to be arrogant, her small face covered by her beautiful hair was strangely charming. This was purely an accident. Yang Fan coldly snorted and said with a cold face, "Do you know why I came to see you today?" Princess Taiping frowned and smiled sweetly. Her expression was extremely charming and quick-witted. Needless to say, of course it is to thank me for bribing the jailers and traffic officials with a large sum of money to help you alter the documents of release, colluding with each other in prison, and not hesitating to tarnish my clean reputation to save you from prison. Yang Fan was suddenly at a loss for words. although Princess Taiping said these words as a joke. But the truth was indeed reasonable. In order to save him, did Princess Taiping pay little? She had just saved his life. Yang Fan had always been clear about gratitude and grudges. If others treated him well, he would definitely repay them with all his strength. But towards Taiping, Princess Taiping glanced at his expression and twisted her plump waist, saying sweetly, "Come, sit beside me." Yang Fan's expression became serious and said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, I admit that you saved my life. You saved my life. So naturally I am very grateful to you. You are a high and mighty princess. So naturally your life is not in danger. This life-saving grace, I am afraid that I will not be able to repay it in my life, so I will owe you for the rest of my life. But why did you force Wan, and Xiaoman to make such a deadly oath? Why?" Princess Taiping suddenly jumped up and her chest suddenly rippled. It seemed that this bold and unrestrained princess did not wear a bra in her own house. "Why? You tell me why?" Princess Taiping was furious. Her face was flushed red. She originally had a calm and composed appearance, but Yang Fan's one sentence had infuriated her. Perhaps only Yang Fan had the ability to make her happy, make her angry, completely unable to control her own emotions. "You tell me why. Why can you accept one, but not me? Am I not as beautiful as her? Or am I not as talented as her?" Princess Taiping approached step by step like an angry tigress. "You shut up! I know what you are going to say. It is nothing more than an excuse that you do not know the cause of your love, right? Good. If so, I will accept it. But what about Xie Xiaoman?" Princess Taiping sneered. "In that case, you should not also like her. I forced myself on you, but she was forced on you by others. Why can you accept her, but not me? You tell me." Yang Fan was stunned. He looked at her and did not say a word for a long time. Princess Taiping's question was so deafening that Yang Fan's heart thundered. Why? Yes, whether it is beauty, status, talent, or deep love for me, Princess Taiping is not inferior to Wan Xiaoman, or Anu. Why, no matter how much she lowers herself, I am not willing to accept her. Chapter 383. Seeing Yang Fan standing there in a daze, the Princess of Taiping's voice suddenly turned soft and weak. In a low voice she said, "Fan Lang, until now I still remember clearly the kiss I had with you on the 100-foot flowering tree that year during the Shangyuan period. Until now, I still remember the pleasure and prestige I felt when I fought shoulder to shoulder with you on the polo field. Perhaps you have forgotten all of this, but I have always firmly remembered it in my heart as if it happened yesterday." Princess Taiping gently raised her head. Between her soft black hair, her eyes were glistening with tears. "Do you still remember all these? If I have done something wrong, I can change it. Is it so difficult to get your love? Tell me, what do I have to do to make you accept me?" When she found that she fell in love with Yang Fan, she thought of making Yang Fan her gigolo. It was true that it was an insult to a man with self-esteem, but Taiping never wanted to insult him. She was just used to being superior and used to taking whatever she wanted. She didn't know that this request was a serious injury to his dignity. She was a princess, the favorite of the emperor and the empress. Her first husband became her husband with just a touch of her slender fingers. Her second husband was forced on her by the mother for the political purpose of uniting the Wu family and the Li family. It had nothing to do with whether she liked him or not. Although she was extremely smart, she didn't know that there were other ways to win a man's heart. She thought that it was enough that she had beauty, identity, and status to be worthy of him. As for the title of gigolo, wasn't a man who was attached to a noble woman, but not her husband, called a gigolo? Anyway, she knew that she would protect him, love him, and obey him in everything. That was enough. She hadn't learned to put down her arrogance in front of the man she loved. So she failed. From then on, Her attitude towards Yang Fan softened a lot. She still loved this man, so she boldly suggested that she would not restrict his identity and would not ask him to submit to her. She only asked him to come and accompany her occasionally, or just once, for a night of love and reminiscence for the rest of their lives. In her opinion, there was nothing wrong with saying that. Wasn't the final stage of love between a man and a woman? Why did it have to be the man who made the request? Couldn't she take the initiative? Could it be that she had to lie in her lover's arms tenderly, act coy, provoke his lust, and then obey him half-willingly? Was this how a woman should be? She loved Yang Fan very much. She wanted him, so she brought it up directly. She didn't understand at all. Her first rough request was a humiliation to a man with high self-esteem, but this time it made him feel like she was belittling herself, as if she was only infatuated with sex. In fact, with her identity, status, and beauty, if she was only obsessed with carnal desire, what kind of handsome man couldn't she find? What kind of strong man couldn't she have? Why was she so infatuated with Yang Fan? Why did she spend so much effort to rescue Yang Fan after he was imprisoned for treason? Don't think that the princess was very rich. The princess was not as rich as those big merchants who were as rich as a country. In fact, she was far less rich than them. They also lived on their salary. Although Princess Taiping had been doted on by her father and mother since she was a child and received more rewards than the other princesses, it was inevitable that she would run some shops in secret like the other nobles. However, in order to rescue Yang Fan, what she paid was also a huge fortune for her, but she did not think about it. In particular, she had a sensitive identity as a member of the royal family of Li Tang, and Yang Fan was imprisoned for supporting the crown prince's restoration. Her intervention was not only a matter of losing money to avoid disaster, but also a matter of carelessness. She could also get involved and arouse the suspicion of the Queen Mother. She didn't even consider these at all. In fact, she had been secretly thinking about what was wrong with her. What did she do wrong? Why didn't Lang Jun like her, and why did he hate her so much? Therefore, she originally liked to wear bright red clothes, and she was also suitable to wear that kind of clothes. The same color might be too vulgar on other women, but on her it showed her grace, beauty, and charm. She was the flower of Luoyang in the Tang dynasty, the symbol of peony, Princess Taiping. However, now she gradually began to like wearing plain clothes. At least in front of Yang Fan, she would definitely pay attention to wearing plain and elegant clothes, just because it was Shangguan Wanner's favorite clothes. Just because Yang Fan liked Wanner, so she wanted to please him. She was a noble princess, but she didn't like butterflies, flowers, or playing with cats and dogs like a delicate lady. What she liked was sumo wrestling, kuju, and horse racing, which were unrestrained and fanatical sports, just like her straightforward and unrestrained personality. But when she found out that Yang Fan had bought 2 raccoons, she also bought 2. Princess Taiping didn't know that under the control of her subconscious, she actually put down her pride and deliberately imitated and learned from the woman Yang Fan liked. All these were just to get Yang Fan to look back at her. Looking at her tearful eyes, Yang Fan couldn't help but ask himself, if she had never looked down on me, if she had been as gentle as Wan, would I have fallen in love with her? However, all the assumptions were meaningless. Luo Fu had a husband, and the prince had a wife. Moreover, she forced Wanner to make an oath, which was too. Thinking of this, Yang Fan said stiffly, "So, you have a reason to force Wanner to make an oath to leave me?" Princess Taiping's eyes flashed, and she immediately asked, "Why only Wanner? Xiao Man didn't tell you?" Princess Taiping was smart, after all. Although she was still sad and angry, she immediately heard the problem in Yang Fan's words. "Xiao Man." Yang Fan smiled and said, "I know that Xiao Man made an oath. She said that if I followed the oath, I would become her long-lost brother. To be honest, Your Highness, not long after I went to prison, I reunited with Xiao Man. She is my younger sister who I have been separated from since I was young, and I am her brother. Princess Taiping's eyes brightened, and she said in surprise, "Then you," Yang Fan said. "I'm sorry to disappoint your highness. Xiao Man and I are not related by blood. We just depend on each other since childhood. We are like brother and sister." Princess Taiping was startled for a while, and then she giggled. Good, good. This Xiao Man is really clever. She actually made a fool out of this empress. Actually, I had prepared a set of oath for her. I didn't expect that she would say it herself. I was a little surprised at that time. I didn't expect that was the reason. Princess Taiping nodded and looked at Yang Fan again. She smiled and said, "But Wanner didn't make a single mistake. She swore according to my words. What will you do?" At this time, there were still tears in her eyes, but her spirit had risen. Yang Fan said in a deep voice, "I want to ask you, what oath did you force her to make? If Wanner has to leave me because of this, I will never forgive you." "So what?" Princess Taiping slightly raised her eyebrows and suddenly spread out. There was a very special seductive feeling. "Otherwise, will you be good to me? If you can't love me for a lifetime, then it's not bad to hate me for a lifetime. At least you remember me in your heart." Princess Taiping flirtatiously turned around. Yang Fan grabbed her arm. Princess Taiping's face became stern and said, "Let go." Although she had the intention to please Yang Fan, but it was easy to change mountains and rivers, but it was hard to change one's character. It was not her nature to deliberately change for the sake of others. After venting, Princess Taiping somewhat recovered her bold and unrestrained personality. Yang Fan really had a headache with her. If there was enmity, he could take revenge. If there was kindness, he could repay kindness. But if it was all on one person, it was really difficult to grasp the propriety. Yang Fan could not forgive her for bullying Wanner, but she really had feelings for him. After all, he was just a young boy. He didn't have much experience in the matters of love. He didn't know how to treat her well. He tightly grabbed Princess Taiping's arm, but he couldn't do anything soft or hard. He didn't know what to do next. Princess Taiping shouted. Seeing that he didn't let go, she couldn't help but look at him and faintly said, if you were half as good to me as you were to her." After a moment of silence, she suddenly used her strength to struggle free from Yang Fan's hand. She gracefully walked over and said, "In a few days it will be Chinese Valentine's Day. I want to go boating on the Luo River. You should come too." Yang Fan coldly snorted. He was about to refuse when Princess Taiping looked back and smiled. The stern expression on her face suddenly became like a fresh flower blown by the spring wind, bright and beautiful. She raised her willowy eyebrows and her charming almond-shaped eyes glanced at Yang Fan. "Wanner's vow is not unbreakable. As long as I am happy." Yang Fan was surprised and happy. He hurriedly asked, "How to break it?" Princess Taiping proudly smiled. Her smile was like a fresh and beautiful peony that had just bloomed. "Humph, so are you coming or not?" Yang Fan returned in low spirits, faced with a woman who couldn't be hit or scolded, who couldn't be begged with soft words, who would turn a deaf ear to reason, who could act coquettishly, who could cry, who could act coquettishly, who could act cute, and who could even be affectionate. What else could Yang Fan do? If he left, then so be it. He even wore Wu Yu's Prince Consort Wu's robe. What else could he do? His robe was a formal official robe. It wasn't like Princess Taiping's soft and thin robe. Her clothes were already dry when she glared at him, smiled sweetly and shed tears. If he went out wearing a wet robe, this rumor would not only spread within the princess residence. When Yang Fan walked out of the princess residence, the servants of the princess residence looked at him with admiration. They said, "Look at him. He slept with the prince consort's woman. He even wore the prince consort's robe. He left in such a big way. He really surpassed his master. He is even more impressive and overbearing than his master Shui." Huai. Chapter 384. Wu Zetian leaned on the pillow and her body suddenly swayed as she slowly woke up. Wanner, who was waiting on the side, quickly came forward to support her. Wu Zetian sighed and said with a smile, "Can't do it, can't do it." Jin fell asleep again. AI. 2 years ago, I still felt full of energy. How long has it been? Jin would doze off from time to time. Shang Wanwan hurriedly said, "Everyone is working hard on the affairs of the state. That's why they feel tired. In fact, everyone's body is healthy and in good condition." Wu Zetian smiled and shook her head. Just as she wanted to sit up, she suddenly lay back down and said with a frown, "Jeanne is a little dizzy, my ears are a little buzzing, and my legs are also weak." Wanner saw that Wu Zetian's complexion was indeed not very good and her face was somewhat pale. She could not help but quickly said, "Wanner, go and call the imperial physician over to take a look at everyone." Wu Zetian wanted to shake her head, but after a second thought, she nodded her head and said, "Don't be so ostentatious. Just call Imperial Physician Shen over to take a look at Jen." Wanna knew that Wu Zetian was not willing to admit defeat and was not willing to let others think that she was old. Imperial Physician Shen was, after all, the person by her bedside and was very clear about her physical condition, so there was no need to avoid it. She quickly agreed and helped Wu Zetian to sit down. She called the palace maids to serve her carefully and then quietly left. Wu Zetian's condition of feeling unwell after waking up had occurred frequently recently. In fact, this state of discomfort was only due to brain anemia. Even in modern times, many old people did not pay much attention to this point. In the summer, old people were sleepy, and after eating lunch, some old people would sit on the sofa or chair and doze off. As a result, there was more blood flowing through the stomach and intestines after the meal, causing severe ischemia in the brain. When they woke up, they would feel particularly uncomfortable. But Shanghai Wanner did not understand the reason. If the emperor was not feeling well, naturally they must quickly call the imperial physician over. Shanghai Wanner had just walked out of the main hall and was about to summon the chamberlain to instruct him to immediately summon Imperial Physician Shen. She was also afraid that the young chamberlain was not sensible and would attract too much attention if he went, so she warned him to try his best not to attract too much attention from the medical officials. As he was giving instructions, Wei Tuan dashed into the main hall. Wu Zetian was leaning on a pillow and a little palace maid was gently massaging her shoulders. Suddenly seeing Wei Tuaner appear, she said lazily, "Tuaner is here. Come, give Zhen's shoulders a massage. Your strength is neither light nor heavy. It suits Zhen the best." This servant is used to being ordered around by everyone. Naturally, it suits everyone's wishes. It's not that this servant's technique is brilliant. Wei Tuaner walked over with a smile and asked the palace maid to step aside. She took over and gently massaged Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian raised her head in satisfaction and closed her eyes slightly. Tuaner massaged Wu Zetian's shoulders as she said, "This servant has just come back with this month's expenditure. Speaking of which, it's strange. The Crown Prince's palace did not increase the number of people in these 2 months, but the expenditure of candles has increased by more than 30%. This servant is a little puzzled. Today, when I distributed the expenditure to each palace hall, I specially instructed eunuch Jing to ask why the Crown Prince's palace increased the expenditure of candles. I thought that if the Crown Prince needed it, this servant and everyone else would use it sparingly in the future. No matter what, the Crown Prince cannot be wronged." But strangely, when eunuch Jing went to the Crown Prince's palace to ask, the people in the palace denied it and refused to admit that there was a need for more candles. Eunuch Jing was also thinking about it. He happened to pass by the Crown Princess's chamber and saw that the window was open, so he took a look inside. Look, there's a stack of yellow paper on the table, and there's a box of cinnabar beside it. There are many talismans drawn on the yellow paper. Wei Tuaner giggled and said, "Everyone, what do you think the Crown Princess is doing? Sooner or later, the Crown Princess is going to be the mother of the world. Why does she want to learn the Tao and become an immortal?" At first, Wu Zetian did not pay attention. Her eyes were hazy, and she rested with her half-closed eyes. She casually listened to her speak. When she heard the words yellow paper, cinnabar, and Tao cultivation, she seemed to think of something. Her eyes suddenly opened, and a glimmer of light flashed through her murky old eyes. Wu Zetian slowly sat up and stared at Wei Tuaner. She said in a low voice, "Are you sure?" Wei Tuaner said, "This servant has never been there and naturally did not see it. However, this is what Eunuch Jing said when he came back. Eunuch Jing usually helps this servant manage the palace treasury. How can he not recognize these things? If he doesn't recognize them, it would be the talismans on the yellow paper. He doesn't recognize them at all. This servant also doesn't recognize them." Wu Zetian slowly stood up and started to pace around the room. Wei Tuaner quickly came over and held her arm. Wu Zetian pondered in her heart. Yellow paper, cinnabar. Is the crown princess really going to cultivate the Tao? Wu Zetian thought for a moment and asked softly, "You didn't tell the crown princess that you discovered these things, right?" Wei Tuaner smiled and said, "Hi. Eunuch Jing just came back to tell this servant about it and treat it as a joke. How could he mention it in front of the crown princess? As a servant, I have to follow the rules of a servant." Wu Zetian softly acknowledged with a gloomy expression. At this time, Shanghai Wana walked in and saw Tuaner supporting Wu Zetian as they strolled around the palace. She greeted, "Sister Tuaner is here." Wei Tuaner turned and saw her. She quickly nodded and greeted, "Sister Waner." Shanghai Wana smiled and nodded at her. She walked towards Wu Zetian and asked, "Is everyone better? Why are you all up and walking around?" Wei Tuaner said, "Why is everyone not feeling well?" Wu Zetian said with a gloomy expression, "Yes, we have not been feeling well for the past 2 months." Shanghai Wana advised, "Everyone should sit for a while. Let's wait for Imperial Physician Shen to come and examine everyone." Wu Zetian shook her head. She slowly looked at the caisson on the roof and the furnishings around her. She said in a low voice, "Waner, Tuaner, do you think that there is something bad in this room? I have not been feeling well for the past 2 months." Shanghai Wana was stunned. She asked in surprise, "Why does everyone say so?" Wu Zetian shook her head. "I have a feeling. I have a feeling. It's so gloomy that it makes people feel uncomfortable." Shanghai Wana thought, it must be because His Majesty is getting old. That's why he often feels cold. She said, "If that's the case, why don't Waner accompany everyone out? Let's go to Flying Fragrance Hall and bask in the sun." Wu Zetian said with a gloomy expression, "I'm afraid the sun can't get rid of some of the yin energy." Shanghai Wana heard that there was a hidden meaning in her words. She felt it was strange. Wu Zetian's eyes flashed. She lowered her head and muttered to Shanghai Wana, "Waner, go and pass on my oral order. Tell Gao Ing to bring some inner guards to see me." Shanghai Wana was a little surprised, but seeing that Wu Zetian's expression was not good, she did not dare to ask. She quickly agreed and left the hall. Wu Zetian asked Wei Tuaner to help her back to the couch. She sat down and ordered, "Tuaner, bring some competent palace eunuchs and go with the inner guards to the Crown Prince Palace." Wei Tuaner quickly replied, "Yes. Everyone, why do you want me to go?" Wu Zetian smiled coldly and said, "Go and search the entire place for me. If there is any place where the soil is loose, dig it up." "I'm worried." Her slightly cloudy but dignified eyes looked coldly out of the window. She slowly said, "I'm worried that in the Crown Prince Palace there's something unclean." Unclean! Shanghai Wana felt it was strange at first. Then she thought of what Wu Zetian had told Wei Tuaner. Shanghai Wana suddenly had an idea. 2 terrifying words suddenly appeared in her mind. Loathing curse! Loathing curse had been widely spread among the people since ancient times. It was considered the most effective curse method. Legends of using loathing curse to harm people were widespread. Even in the palace, such things happened frequently. And in the palace, the most famous story of loathing curse happened to Emperor Wu of Han. After Qin Shi Huang, Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty was the most brilliant and powerful emperor. If Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty was ranked first, there would be no one who would object. However, such an emperor had almost executed his entire clan in his later years. During the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, he dreamt that someone was using loathing curse to harm him. He sent his most trusted official, Jiang Chong, to investigate this matter. Jiang Chong won the emperor's trust by creating major cases. He immediately began to act decisively. First, Prime Minister Gongsun, he and his son were killed by him. Then, Emperor Wu's nephew, Wei Yuan, was killed because he was an accomplice of cursing the emperor. Then, Emperor Wu's daughters, Princess Yang Shi and Princess Yui, were also killed. Jiang Chong was in high spirits. Finally, he found out that the empress and the crown prince were the culprits. Crown Prince Lu Ju was shocked. He knew that his father was headstrong in his later years and couldn't argue with him. He angrily led the crown prince's palace guards to kill Jiang Chong. Emperor Wu was furious and immediately sent troops to arrest the crown prince. In the end, the crown prince was killed. The empress hanged herself, and the 3 royal grandsons also died. More than 100,000 people were killed or exiled because of this case. Just because of one sentence from the cruel official, Jiang Chong, Emperor Wu forced his wife to death and killed his son, daughter, nephew, grandson, and granddaughter. He killed so many people that there was no heir to the royal family. The imperial harem had no ruler, and the court was out of control. This brought a major political crisis to the Han Empire. Thinking of this, Shanghai Wanner couldn't help but be shocked. The empress's heart was as hard as iron, and her desire to kill was not inferior to Emperor Wu. Moreover, she was the same as Emperor Wu of Han. She believed in things like divine Tao sorcery the most. If the empress suspected the loathing curse and found the evidence, what kind of bloody storm would it cause? Not long after, Gao Ying, Lan Yiqing, and a group of female bodyguards, who were fully armed, rushed to Wu Cheng Hall. Wei Tuaner also brought Officer Jing and a large number of her trusted eunuchs and palace maids to the front of the hall to await orders. Gao Ying held her sword and stood in front of the hall. She heard Wu Zetian saying coldly, "Commander Gao, bring the inner guards and follow Tuaner to the crown prince's palace. Just listen to Tuaner's orders." "Yes." Gao Ying looked at Wei Tuaner in surprise and said respectfully, "Yes, your majesty." Wei Tuaner pretended to be scared and said, "Everyone then." "I'll go now." Wu Zetian nodded lightly. Wei Tuaner bowed and left. When she turned around and walked out of Wu Cheng Hall, a gleam of pride flashed in her eyes. Chapter 385. Ever since Wei Tuan led a large group of eunuchs and palace maids under the protection of the inner guards and conducted a thorough search of the crown prince's palace. Everyone in the crown prince's palace was in a state of panic. No one knew what had happened. Wei Tuan led people to search and left without saying a word. Not long after she left, the empress ordered Crown Princess Lu and concubine Dou to see the emperor. The 2 ladies didn't dare to delay and quickly changed into formal palace clothes to see the emperor. In the end, the previous empress of the Tang dynasty, the current Crown Princess Lu, and concubine Dou still hadn't returned to the palace when night fell. Everyone in the palace was anxious and uneasy. However, the crown prince of the Zhou dynasty, Li Dan, who had changed his name to Wu Dan, didn't seem to feel anything. When night fell, he was still happily drinking wine and enjoying the music. The main hall was brightly lit with candles, making it as bright as day. 3 musicians wearing large sleeves and crowns on their heads were singing and dancing in the hall. Sometimes they would use their vocal skills to make bird cries, making Crown Prince Wu Dan clap his hands and laugh. The song and dance being performed in the hall was called Long Live Bird Songs. This was a song and dance created by his Empress Wu Zetian. After Wu Zetian's parrot learned how to speak, the first thing it said was, "Long live the emperor." This made Wu Zetian so happy that she ordered people to perform a song and dance to remember this, which was the song "Long Live Bird Songs." Good, good, good. After the 3 birdmen left, the crown prince laughed and said, "I'm drunk. Where's Jinzong? Ask him to sing a song for me." The crown prince had the grandeur of a crown prince. Even the eunuchs and female officials who were favored by the empresses sighed, dared to scold the crown prince of the Zhou dynasty. However, even wealthy merchants would have a few singers and dancers. The crown prince couldn't possibly not have a few musicians and dancers by his side. Even though the crown prince's expenses were greatly reduced, he still had some attendants. There were about 12 to 13 musicians and dancers around him. Following Li Dan's orders, his favorite musician, and Jinzong walked into the hall. This Jinzong was a young man in his early 30s. His appearance was nothing special, and his body was thin. However, his singing voice was clear and melodious. He was a musician with an excellent voice, and Li Dan had always enjoyed listening to him sing. And Jinzong slowly walked into the hall. There was not a trace of joy on his face. Instead, it was filled with endless misery. Under the light of the candles, he saw that it was too strange that the crown princess Lu and consort Dou had been taken away. Even now, they had not returned to the palace. He was afraid that they were in trouble. But the crown prince was still singing and dancing, and Jinzong was furious. However, Li Dan acted as if she did not see it. She smiled calmly and said, "Jinzong, sing a nice song for me to accompany my drinking." And Jinzong sighed inwardly, bowed slightly to him, and made a hand signal to the audience. Seeing this, the musicians in the hall knew that he was going to sing without accompaniment, so they stopped playing the flute and zither, and Jinzong raised his head to look at the well in the hall. He stood silently for a moment, then suddenly opened his mouth to sing, "Under the melon-yellow platform." As soon as Li Dan heard the first line, he could not stop his expression from changing. He shouted, "Shut up!" And Jinzong acted as if he did not hear and continued to sing. "The melon is ripe and the seeds are separated. Once plucked, the melon is fine. Shut up! Shut up!" Li Dan angrily threw out a wine cup. The cup shattered into pieces at Jinzong's feet, and Jinzong did not move. He continued to sing in his sorrowful, low voice. His mournful and clear voice echoed in the hall, once more plucking the melon thinner. 3 plucking is still fine, for plucking the mango returns. As Jinzong sang, 2 streams of tears flowed down his face. This song, written by Li Dan's second brother, the former crown prince of the Tang dynasty, Li Xian, echoed in the hall for a long time. All of the palace maids, musicians, and dancers heard it and felt their hearts move. They all lowered their heads, and some even began to quietly cry. Li Dan angrily shouted, "Guards!" 2 fat eunuchs answered and stood in the hall. Li Dan pointed at Jinzong and shouted, "This person has disturbed our drinking mood. He is truly vexing. Drag him away and flog him 20 times. The 2 fat eunuchs crossed their arms and coldly glanced at Jinzong. They rushed forward, grabbed his arms, and dragged him to the palace. These 2 fat eunuchs had been transferred to the crown prince's palace by Wei Tuan to serve the crown prince. In reality, they were in charge of surveillance. When they heard Jinzong sing the song of the late crown prince Li Xian, who had been forced to commit suicide by the empress, the 2 were already angry. Now that they had received the crown prince's orders, they naturally would not be polite. Li Dan angrily flicked his sleeves and stood up. He shouted, "What a disappointment! Disperse, we are going to sleep." Li Dan strode back to his own palace. Seeing that there was no one in the room, a bitter expression suddenly appeared on his face. He weakly leaned on the bed and said in a low voice, "Consort Lu, Consort Dou, are you still all right?" Before he could finish, he choked with sobs, tears slowly crawling down his cheeks. "Crown Prince, I will help the crown prince change his clothes and rest. A clear girl's voice suddenly came from the door of the palace. Li Dan hurriedly wiped his tears and pretended to be calm. "Come in." Under Wei Tuan Er's repeated cuts, the number of servants in the Crown Prince's palace was decreasing. After Consort Lu and Consort Do were taken away, many of their palace maids were also taken away. Now, these maids were temporarily transferred from other palaces to serve the Crown Prince. Li Dan did not know if she was the Empress's spy, so he did not dare to show his sorrow in front of her. The young palace maid leisurely walked around the screen and bowed to Li Dan. Then she went forward to help him undress. Li Dan opened his arms and allowed her to untie his belt and take off his long robe. Under the light of the lantern, he saw that this young girl was about 14 or 15 years old. Her hair was combed into a black bun, which was so shiny that it could reflect one's reflection. Her graceful hair reached her forehead, and she had a unique charm of a young girl. He could not help but gently lift her chin and carefully look at her. The young palace maid only made eye contact with him before shyly lowering her eyes and gently letting him look at her. She was dressed in a palace dress, and half of her breasts were exposed. Even though they had just bloomed, her skin was smooth and smooth. Her waist was slender, and her pretty face and red lips made people want to kiss her under the light. Li Dan showed an expression of admiration and smiled. "What is your name?" The young palace maid shyly replied, "This servant is called Lan Fei. Lan Fei? Good name." Li Dan's hand gently slid from her chin to her shoulder, and then gently held her soft and slender jade arm. He softly said, "Consort Lu and Consort Do have been summoned by the Empress. It seems that they will not return to the palace tonight. Fei, tonight you will serve them in bed." Lan Fei opened her beautiful eyes and exclaimed in surprise, "Crown Prince!" Li Dan used a military tone to order her, "Undress!" Lan Fei hesitated for a moment, and her delicate face slightly blushed. She had no choice but to obey the Crown Prince's order. She stood up gracefully and gently untied her robe. She was only wearing a small dress, and she looked at Li Dan in panic. Li Dan used a commanding tone and said, "Take it all off." This 30-year-old crown prince might not have much status in the imperial court or the palace, but he was not someone a little palace maid like Lan Fei dared to defy. She hesitated for a moment, then gently bit her thin lips and closed her eyes. She took off her tube top and undergarments one by one, revealing a youthful and energetic female body in front of him. Her jade-like body was soft and lovely, and her skin was soft and smooth. Even though she still had some of the childishness of a young girl and had not fully matured, and there was still a certain gap between her and the plump beauty that the Tangs admired, her seductive charm was undeniable. Li Dan looked at her beautiful body, and his breathing gradually quickened. He quickly tore off his own robe, picked up the smooth and soft female body, and threw himself on the bed. The two fat eunuchs had beaten the musician and Jinzong's skin and flesh open with 20 planks of the planks. Rolling up their sleeves, they came back to report. When they arrived at the front of the bedroom, suddenly they heard a girl's tender moaning in pain, as well as the Crown Prince's hurried breathing and licentious laughter. The two fat eunuchs looked at each other, twitched their mouths in disdain, and quietly left. In Wu Zetian's bedchamber, Wei Tuan quietly walked into the hall and stood in front of Wu Zetian with her hands hanging down. Two female officials were serving Wu Zetian, carefully removing the complicated and beautiful jewelry on her head one by one. Wu Zetian saw Wei Tuaner walking over in the mirror and lightly asked, "How is it?" Wei Tuaner said, "The Crown Princess, Lady Lu, and the Crown Princess, Lady Do, refused to admit their crimes and refused to confess. We have received orders from everyone to beat them to death." Wu Zetian said, "Wrap them in straw mats and send them out of the palace tomorrow morning. After cremation, sprinkle the ashes into the Luo River." Wei Tuaner bowed and said yes. Wu Zetian asked again, The palace maids around them also refused to confess? Wei Tuan Er's eyebrows rose slightly, and she revealed a slightly proud expression. She said, "They refused to confess at first, but after being beaten, they could not bear the pain, and someone confessed." Wu Zetian's gaze slightly froze, and she asked coldly, "Does the crown prince know?" Wei Tuan hesitated for a moment. Wu Zetian still sat motionless, and her eyes looked into the mirror, but gradually a cold light appeared in her eyes. Wei Tuan Er's face showed fear, and she replied timidly, "Lady Lu and Lady Dou are practicing witchcraft and cursing everyone in the palace. The crown prince, the crown prince, the crown prince naturally knows about it." Wu Zetian looked at herself in the mirror, and her eyebrows, eyes, and mouth slowly drooped down, and gradually formed an extremely cold expression. The fingers of the two female servants beside her trembled, and one of them panicked. When she pulled out a jewelry, she pulled Wu Zetian's hair, and she was so frightened that she knelt down and repeatedly kowtowed, "This servant deserves to die! This servant deserves to die!" Wu Zetian ignored them, and only said to Wei Tuaner with a cold and cynical voice, "Tomorrow morning, pass down the decree that the mother family of Lady Lu and Lady Dou will be exiled to Lingnan." Wei Tuan hurriedly agreed, and asked softly, "Then the crown prince?" Wu Zetian picked up a pearl, and gently rubbed it, feeling its smooth and pink texture. She said in a low voice, "There is no court meeting tomorrow. Ask Lai Junshin to come and see me at 3:45 a.m. Yes. Chapter 386. Yang Fan and Xiao Man had just become husband and wife, so they were very close to each other. When they got home at night, the couple had dinner together, chatted, and drank a few cups of rice wine. After getting a little tipsy, they walked hand in hand in the back garden. It was almost Chinese Valentine's Day, so the moon wasn't very bright. However, the two didn't light a lamp or ask a maid to accompany them. They just walked side by side in the quiet night, talking softly. When they came to a cluster of blooming flowers, they smelled the fragrance and felt refreshed. Yang Fan pulled Xiao Man to sit among the flowers. Xiao Man was about to sit on the stone bench next to Yang Fan, but Yang Fan, who had sat down first, pulled her into his arms. Xiao Man was really gentle to Yang Fan, and she did whatever he wanted. She sat on Yang Fan's lap, and after a moment of shyness, she wrapped her arms around his neck. Yang Fan held Xiao Man's slender waist with one hand, and gently stroked her smooth and firm thigh with the other. He said, "The Emperor is obviously waiting for me to come up with a way to clean up the mess, but it's already been a few days, and there hasn't been any movement from the censorate. If this continues, the Emperor will definitely be impatient, and maybe tomorrow he will make a decision on the prime ministers. At that time, there will be a conclusion to my matter. I think I will have to leave the palace for a while." Xiao Man said reluctantly, "If you don't stay in the palace, then you will have to go to another imperial army. Lang Jun is in the barracks, so it won't be easy to go home." "Yes." Yang Fan kissed her thin, soft, and sweet lips. He said, "Can't bear to part with Lang Jun?" He thought that this teasing would make Xiao Man shy and silent, but he didn't expect Xiao Man's face to turn red, and she lowered her head slightly. After a moment of silence, she actually softly said, "Yes, can't bear to part." Her words were full of affection, and Yang Fan unconsciously hugged her tightly. He gently stroked her shoulders, and their ears and temples were close for a while. Although they didn't say a word, their tenderness and affection were all in the silence. Yang Fan stroked her hair and said softly, "It's fine if you go to the imperial army. You can always come back after 10 days or half a month." He was afraid that when he was sent to a place, the imperial court would not allow him to bring his family with him. That would be terrible. "So, I would like to meet Xuesher tomorrow and ask him to represent me so that I can remain in the capital." Yes, although Master Xue was Long Jun's master, he still had to be polite. "Tomorrow morning, I'll go to the warehouse and see if there's anything suitable for Master Shui. After I've made the necessary arrangements, Lang Jun." At this point, Xiaoman's voice stopped abruptly as if she had thought of something. Yang Fan patted her head and said with a smile, "What's wrong? Did you think of something?" Xiaoman said, "When Lang Jun said that he was going to visit Master Shui tomorrow, I suddenly thought of something. This afternoon, a very strange person came to visit, but he didn't bring a visiting card. He only brought a message, asking Lang Jun to attend a banquet at the Golden Hairpin Tavern tomorrow afternoon." When Yang Fan heard this, he also felt a bit strange. For some reason, he suddenly thought of Tin Ano. The first time he went to that place was with Tin Ano, and he was lucky enough to enjoy a wonderful Huxian dance. These 2 days after he was released from prison, he had a lot of things to deal with, and he didn't have time to look for An Nu's whereabouts. Could it be that she took the initiative? Thinking of this, Yang Fan hurriedly asked, "What did that person say in the message?" Xiaoman said, "That person said that his master's name is Lotus Canal Companion Fishing Mountain Man, and he invited you to the Golden Hairpin Tavern tomorrow. He also said a lot of strange things." When Yang Fan heard the 4 words Lotus Canal Companion Fishing Mountain Man, a strange expression appeared on his face. Fortunately, Xiaoman was softly nestled in his chest and didn't see his expression. Lotus Canal Companion Fishing Mountain Man? Yang Fan thought of the beautiful princess who was dragged into the water by the fish, and her alluring buttocks when she ran into the moon sweeping pavilion with her wet clothes. He immediately snorted, "She's just pretending to be mysterious. Ignore her. I'll be back after I go to White Horse Temple." Xiaoman innocently said, "N." Nu also thought that person was pretending to be mysterious and crazy. Not only did he refuse to tell me his real name, but he also said that his master caught 2 big fish. One was more alert and actually let go of the hook, but the other was fatter and got hooked. He wanted to invite you to the Golden Hairpin Tavern to share delicious food. Yang Fan was stunned again. "Is that so, then? I'll go." Xiaoman curiously asked, "Does Lang Jun know who that person is? Do you understand what he's saying?" Yang Fan looked at the mermaid in front of him, who was a little alert and actually let go of the hook, intimately scratched her nose and softly sighed. "Yes, this person is a true disciple of Jiang Taigong. When he's fishing, there's always someone willing to take the bait. I'll just go with her." Shui Huai really cared for Yang Fan. In the past, he sheltered Yang Fan mainly because Yang Fan was the most promising among his disciples and brought him a lot of face. That day when he was drunk, he confided in Yang Fan, and in his heart he faintly regarded Yang Fan as a close friend. When Yang Fan explained the purpose of his visit, Shui Huai immediately agreed. As soon as Yang Fan left, Shui Huai changed into a purple kasaya bestowed by the emperor and rushed to the palace with his 2 trusted disciples, Hong 1 and Hong 6. On the lovely spring terrace, Lai Junqin was prostrating himself in front of Wu Zetian. 1 bow, 2 bows stand up, kneel meticulous, extremely respectful. As he knelt down, his eyes secretly glanced at Wu Zetian's expression. Unfortunately, Wu Zetian's expression was like that of the great Buddha of Dragon Gate, mysterious and serene. It was impossible to tell whether she was happy or angry. Lai Junqin unconsciously felt a bit of fear in his heart. He considered himself as Wu Zetian's lackey, so he naturally put in a lot of effort to figure out his master's temperament. It seemed that ever since Wu Zetian ascended to the throne, there was only a short period of peace and clarity. Just when the world had a feeling that she was working hard to create a glorious great Zhou Empire, she reverted to her old ways. This old way was suspicion, and bloodlust. In the past, this mentality was based on her desire to become the empress, and the resistance was endless. Not only did it come from Li Tang's imperial family and Li Tang's ministers, but the people also held a suspicious and opposed attitude towards a female empress that had never existed before. In the process of this kind of struggle, Wu Zetian seemed to have the bag of victory, but Chao Mingde's suspicion, Sima Yi's suspicion, and the decisive and unhesitating character of many founding heroes formed the main aspects of her character. Regardless of whether she was calm, thunderous, or kind in front of others, these were the things hidden in her heart. After she ascended to the throne, all of this seemed to disappear. For half a year, there was no longer a reign of terror in the imperial court, and the ruthless officials had put away their weapons. Even the informants in the copper pans were no longer read by her. It seemed that she really intended to use open and above-board political means to govern the world. In the end, it did not take long for Wu Zetian to revert to her old ways because of the struggle for the throne. She was not only the first female empress in history, she was also the oldest empress in history to overthrow the previous regime and ascend to the throne. So after she ascended the throne, the most important problem was not the governance of the country, but the choice of the heir. And through peaceful evolution, she seized power from the hands of her husband and son was unprecedented. So the difficulty of choosing her successor was something that the founding emperors had never encountered before. So she once again reverted to the mentality that she had developed in order to seize the throne. She was doing something that no previous woman had ever done. She was walking a path that no one had ever walked before. In the past, whether it was fighting for the position of empress or emperor, she had a clear goal. But when faced with the problem of inheriting the throne, even someone as wise as she was had no choice. Her future, she could not see it clearly. She was afraid of any counterattack, and she happened to have the greatest power in the world. So what would she do? Lai Junqin had grasped this mentality of Wu Zetian. So he felt that no matter if it was a prince, a general, or a minister, he could do the same as before he helped Wu Zetian ascend to the throne, controlling life and death. But now he could not grasp the emperor's mentality. When Lai Junqin heavily kowtowed for the last time, he suddenly thought of an answer. Could it be that the emperor has made a decision regarding the heir? Wu Zetian did not interrupt his bow with a smile like before. She calmly sat there, waiting for Lai Junqin to finish kowtowing for the last time. Then she slowly said, "Someone in the Eastern Palace has reported a change of heart." Lai Junqin's expression quickly became solemn. Wu Zetian said, "Today a chamberlain revealed that the crown princess, Lady Lu, and concubine Do, harbored resentment against me and used witchcraft to plot against me. Today, the two of them have been executed, and the Eastern Palace chamberlains and palace servants have confessed that the crown prince not only knew about it, but was also the mastermind. Lai Junqin, I hand this case over to you to try." Lai Junqin was ecstatic. He knew that once this case was confirmed, his crime of forcing the prime ministers to confess was no longer a big problem. Wu Zetian was silent for a while, then said, "Dan is my son and he is the crown prince. I do not want the world to know that the current crown prince wants to rebel against the emperor, and I do not want the world to know that my son wants to kill his mother. You cannot bring this person to the Senate, so you can try him in the crown prince's palace." Lai Junqin had already expected this kind of arrangement, so he only calmly agreed and did not raise any questions. Wu Zetian revealed a slightly satisfied expression and said, "The crown prince's palace is under the strict supervision of the palace guards. Without my written order, no one is allowed to enter or leave." Shanghai Wan held up a yellow silk handwritten order from Wu Zetian and handed it over. Wu Zetian said, "Take this and use it to enter the crown prince's palace. I want to know the truth." Lai Junqin took the emperor's order with both hands and humbly lowered his head. I will not disappoint your majesty." At this time, Chamberlain Xiao Hai tiptoed into the hall. Seeing that the emperor had finished talking to Lai Junqin, he bowed and said, "Everyone, White Horse Temple's great master Huai, he requests an audience." Wu Zetian slightly frowned and said, "I have not summoned him. What is he doing here?" However, Wu Zetian had personally decreed that Great Master Huai of the White Horse Temple could enter the palace without being summoned. He could freely enter and leave the palace. Now that Xue Huai had come uninvited, it was not a crime. Wu Zetian pondered for a while, then said, "Call him in." Lai Junqin did not change his expression and directly left the hall. As he turned to leave, he thought to himself, looking at the situation, Xue Huaiyi's royal favor is gradually declining. Chapter 387. This poor monk, Huaiyi, greets your majesty. Master is here. Please have a seat. Thank you, your majesty. Shanghai Wan Er's eyes flickered, and she said to Wu Zetian, "Everyone Wan still has some books to deal with at the history library," Wu Zetian said. "There's no hurry. It won't be too late to go after you deal with the remaining memorials here." As she spoke, she beckoned for a palace maid to massage her legs and asked Xue Huaiyi, "Master, is there a reason you're here?" Shanghai Wan Er's heart skipped a beat when she was called by Wu Zetian. In the past, as long as Xue Huaiyi came, everyone would naturally avoid him. Even if the emperor was not in the mood to do it today, he would still keep Xue Huaiyi by his side for a while. Why now? Wu Zetian did not realize that this action of hers had already caused many people to speculate about it. In fact, she was greatly affected because the person who used the curse to harm her was her own son. Although Wu Zetian had never placed much importance on kinship, she was, after all, old. She was now 70 years old, and her way of thinking was more or less different from before. Of course, subconsciously, although she did not hate Xue Huaiyi, she was not as attached to him as she used to be. It was probably because they had been together for a long time, and she did not have the same passion for Xue Huaiyi as before. With Xue Huaiyi's careless nature, he did not realize the deeper meaning of Wu Zetian's action. He was no longer the young man in his early 20s, and he could no longer snuggle in Wu Zetian's arms and play coquettishly to make her happy. Moreover, Wu Zetian had been working hard for the past few years, racking her brains for the throne. She did not take good care of herself like she did in the past. After removing her makeup, she had wrinkled skin and white hair. She looked old, and he felt disgusted with her from the bottom of his heart. Hearing that Wu Zetian did not ask others to leave, he secretly let out a sigh of relief. Xue Huaiyi went straight to the point. "This poor monk has not seen your majesty for a long time, and I miss you very much. Today, I specially came to the palace to visit your majesty. Moreover, there is a small matter that I would like to trouble your majesty with." Wu Zetian frowned imperceptibly and lightly asked, "Is there a shortage of funds? I can call the palace treasury." Xue Huaiyi laughed and scratched his bald head. "Thank your majesty for your concern. It is not that I lack money to spend, it is because, your majesty, this poor monk has received your majesty's favor to become the abbot of White Horse Temple, and I have accepted a few useless disciples. Speaking of which, the only one among this poor monk's disciples who has some potential is the layman disciple, Yang Fan." Shangguan was pretending to look at the memorials. When she heard this, her heart skipped a beat. "Is this Xue Huaiyi speaking up for Fan Lang?" Xue Huaiyi said, "These days, this poor monk often heard people say that although my disciple Yang Fan was released from prison, he has not returned to the palace to lead troops and protect your majesty for a long time. This has lost the favor of your majesty." Cough, cough. "Your majesty, this poor monk's disciple is extremely loyal to your majesty. Xue Huaiyi said, "These days, this poor monk has often heard people say that although my disciple Yang Fan was released from prison, he has lost the favor of your majesty by not returning to the palace to lead troops and protect your majesty for a long time." Cough. "Your majesty, this poor monk's disciple is extremely loyal to your majesty." Wu Zetian finally understood the purpose of Xue Huaiyi's visit. She smiled and interrupted Xue Huaiyi. "I see, Master is here for your disciple." Wu Zetian gently waved her hand and said, "Master, you don't need to talk about this matter anymore. I did not teach Yang Fan to return to the palace for a long time because I have other plans. However, to say that he has lost my favor or even be demoted is absolutely impossible. Master, you can rest assured." Xue Huaiyi was overjoyed and said, "Since your majesty has said so, then this poor monk can rest assured." "Ah, But how does your majesty plan to arrange for my disciple? Wu Zetian stared at him and said, I have my own arrangements. Now that the edict has not been issued, letting master know first is not in line with the laws of the court. Master, you were asked by your disciple Yang Fan, right? He, master. When you go back, tell him to wait at home with peace of mind. I will make arrangements in a few days. Hearing this, Xuehuai did not ask further. He could only nod and said, Now, I will have to trouble your majesty. This poor monk only has this good disciple. Please take care of him. Beside him, Sheng Guanwan couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Judging from his majesty's tone, Fan Lang won't be implicated by this case anymore. But I wonder what his majesty's so-called appropriate arrangements are for Lang Jun. Yang Fan once again arrived at the Golden Hairpin drunk. He had just tied up his horse and was walking up the stairs to the main entrance when a winemaker, who had politely sent off a customer, turned around and happened to meet him. Oh my, it's General Yang. Quick, invite him in, invite him in. This wine expert was the waiter who had witnessed the conflict between Yang Fan and Wu Yuji. Seeing the most manly man in his heart arrive at the hotel, he was especially excited. Yang Fan was puzzled by his unusual enthusiasm at first. Looking at him carefully, he felt vaguely familiar and knew that he must be the waiter who had seen him the last time. Yang Fan nodded and said, I have come by invitation. Please bring me to the laundry room. He was referring to a private room. The wine expert heard him and said, Aha! The guest in that private room has already arrived. He arrived just a moment earlier than General Yang. I will bring you. Just as he said this, another 2 people walked in through the door, followed by a few family guards in green. One of them raised his voice and said, Innkeeper, is the heaven class still available? I would like to invite an esteemed guest for a drink. The wine expert turned around and was stunned. Yang Fan turned his head and was also stunned. He did not recognize one of the 2 people who had just walked in, but he was very familiar with the other one. It was Princess Taiping's son-in-law, Wu Yuji. Wu Yuji listened to the other person's words with a faint smile on his lips. He did not expect to meet Yang Fan again here. For a moment, the smile froze on his face. The other person saw Yang Fan and Wu Yuji's strange expressions and asked, You know each other? This person was Zhang Kejuan, the son of Great Elder Princess of Yen. Great Elder Princess of Yen, and was the youngest daughter of Emperor Gaozu of Tang, Li Yuan. She was only 4 or 5 years younger than Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian should call her aunt, but she recognized Wu Zetian as her mother. Seeing that Li Tang's imperial family was being purged, the princess hurriedly recognized Wu Zetian as her godmother. She felt that it was not safe, so she actively tried to get close to the Wu family and claimed kinship with the Prince of Wei, Wu Qingxi. She asked her son, Zhang Kejuan, to marry Wu Qingxi's daughter. Wu Qingxi was now a prince, and his daughter was called Junju, so Zhang Kejuan became the Juanma. Because Juanma Zheng actively tried to get close to the Wu family, he was familiar with the kings and generals of the Wu family. Today he met Wu Yuji by chance and knew that Wu Yuji was not in a good mood. He sincerely wanted to curry favor with him and invited him for a drink. He did not expect to run into Yang Fan as soon as they stepped through the door. Wine Scholar was a quick-witted person and knew the situation was not good. The drama of Prince Consort Wu chasing Yang Fan on the street was the hottest topic in Golden Hairpin drunken wine these 2 days. If the 2 of them fought here, Professor Wine shuddered, turned around, and ran away to report the news to the innkeeper. A moment later, the ashen-faced Golden Hairpin drunken wine hurried over with a large group of waiters, shouting as he ran, Stop the fight! Stop the fight! As long as you stop them from fighting in our Golden Hairpin drunken wine, each of you will get 3 months' salary. Injured. If you're injured, I'll cover all your medical expenses and allow you to rest for half a year. Your salary will still be paid. When these waiters ran out in unison, They immediately attracted the attention of many customers. Some busybodies also followed them out. They hurriedly ran into the main hall and stopped at a distance. Wu Yuji's face alternated between red and white. After a long time, he suddenly took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Miraculously, his expression calmed down. "Kejuan, let's go to another shop. I'm not used to this golden hairpin, drunken wine." Wu Yuji's words stunned Zheng Kejuan and Yang Fan. Based on the previous scene of him chasing after Yang Fan on Wuji Long Street, now that they had met again, their eyes were burning with hatred. It was hard to say how the fight would turn out. Zhang Kejuan was still hesitating whether he should help when the time came. If he helped, he would offend Princess Taiping. If he didn't help, it would be inexcusable. Zhang Kejuan immediately heaved a sigh of relief. However, he was also filled with disdain for Wu Yuji. A man can be killed, but not humiliated. Killing one's father and stealing one's wife are absolutely irreconcilable. Wu Yuji is a dignified prince, yet he actually tolerated it? Who would have thought that Wu Yuji's face did not show the slightest bit of shame or anger when he said this? He calmly said this and turned to walk away. Zhang Kejuan was stunned for a moment before he quickly chased after him. "Prince's son-in-law, wait for me." As soon as Wu Yuji left, the hall exploded with noise. The guests and the restless waiters were all talking at once, discussing spiritedly. Someone said, "That's right. Of course I'm not used to golden hairpin, drunken wine. Ha ha, with a certain someone here, all the wine here is sour. Shoo shoo shoo, can you have some manners?" But, speaking of which, Princess Taiping really knows how to control her husband, ah. Yang Fan saw that Wu Yuji actually turned to leave. It was completely different from the last time they met, and he was stunned. He suddenly remembered the words that Princess Taiping said to him when he left Shuyu Pavilion when he went to the Princess Mansion to see Princess Taiping. "You don't have to worry, Wu Yuji will not find trouble with you anymore." He could not help but be secretly surprised. This princess was really amazing. What method did she use to make Wu Yuji swallow his anger like this? Thinking of Princess Taiping's power, Yang Fan couldn't help but feel anxious. He secretly raised his guard and walked over to the wine drinker. "Excuse me, take me there." "Ah, good, good, good. Guest, this way please. General, this way please." The wine drinker came back to his senses and suppressed the urge to kowtow to Yang Fan. He eagerly led him into the restaurant. The waiters and customers who were watching immediately moved to the sides and uniformly looked at Yang Fan, who was walking slowly as a salute. Yang Fan was under a lot of pressure. Chapter 388. The last time Yang Fan was here, he didn't notice that the 2 private rooms on both sides of the door had been changed. That day was the Wu clan's family banquet. The seating arrangement in the hall was also different from today. Today's banquet was arranged around the circular stage, and the private rooms on both sides were in the best position to watch the stage. Once the door of the private room was closed, it was a completely enclosed space where people could talk about private topics, and when they opened it, they could enjoy the singing and dancing on the stage. The disturbance that occurred at the entrance had attracted the attention of many customers, and in order to attract everyone back as soon as possible, the manager sent 6 enchanting beauties to dance a sexy and moving dance on the stage. Yang Fan walked to the orchid room amidst the lively rhythm of the Kacha dance, and there were still 2 tall and sturdy female sumo wrestlers standing at the door. When they saw Yang Fan walking over, the 2 fierce-looking women tried their best to squeeze out a friendly and cordial smile and open the door for him. At this time, the customers of the Golden Hairpin Drunken already knew Yang Fan's identity and were curious as to who he was meeting here. Taking advantage of the opening of the door, everyone looked inside and saw Beauty lying on her side behind a low table, with one hand supporting her cheek, smiling at Yang Fan. The door was closed again, and with just a glance, the Beauty's radiance hit them in the face. Everyone felt that the woman was extremely beautiful, and her charm and temperament were also excellent. That slender thigh that was bent was even more beautiful. But as for her facial features and figure, which part was the most beautiful and what she looked like, they couldn't think of it at the moment, and the only feeling left in their minds was extremely beautiful. Some of the customers raised their wine cups in a daze and drank a large cup of wine, still reminiscing about the beauty's extremely graceful figure and the indescribable beauty. They only felt the fragrance lingering in their teeth, and the aftertaste was endless. Only now did they know that beauty was truly a feast for the eyes. However, even though they had never seen Princess Taiping before, everyone immediately guessed that the woman in the private room was the flower of Luoyang, the princess of the princesses, the noble Taiping. Because even though she was lazily lying on the couch, that kind of noble, awe-inspiring, and sacred beauty was deeply imprinted in everyone's mind. Yang Fan was in the room, so naturally he could see more clearly than anyone else. He was a little curious. He didn't know why Princess Taiping liked to wear plain clothes these days, but the deepest memory in his mind had always been of Princess Taiping wearing a red dress on the banks of the Luo River, like a beautiful mermaid leaping ashore. But he also had to admit that even if Princess Taiping was wearing plain clothes, she was still extremely beautiful. This kind of beauty of hers was completely different from Shanghai one, simple, elegant, tranquil, graceful like a white lotus, her facial features exuding a scholarly air. Even if she was wearing plain clothes, Princess Taiping was dazzling like a cluster of flames. Although she was wearing a simple and elegant gown, it was completely different from Shangguan Wan, Er's wide robe with big sleeves and elegant intellectual beauty. Her plain gown was made in the style of a hoop costume, and it was very tight and close-fitting. It had a half-sleeved collar, a short skirt, a crescent white belt, and pearl-white pointed satin boots. If when Wan was wearing a white robe, she was like a bright moon hanging high in the sky, making people intoxicated with her bright and beautiful. Then Princess Taiping, for a moment, Yang Fan couldn't think of any words to describe her. Perhaps she was like a plate of delicate fish that was as thin as cicadas' wings and as white as the first snow. Anyone who saw her would want to take the entire plate and swallow her proud and enchanting body into their stomach to satiate their desire. Today, she was wearing women's clothing. Yang Fan had rarely seen her go out in women's clothing. "You're a little late." Princess Taiping smiled sweetly at him, lightly patted the couch beside her, and softly said, "Come and sit." Yang Fan looked calm, walked over very calmly, and sat down beside her. Princess Taiping thought that he would be full of vigilance towards her like before, and would never sit beside her. Seeing his action, a trace of surprise appeared in her eyes. That trace of surprise was seen by Yang Fan, and Yang Fan couldn't help but secretly smile. Since the last time when he fled in panic from the princess mansion, he had reflected on the reason why he was often teased by Princess Taiping. In fact, he was often at a disadvantage in front of Princess Taiping. The key was not whether Princess Taiping had guessed what he would do, but facing Princess Taiping, who had both gratitude and resentment towards him, and facing her passionate and bold teasing, Yang Fan's state of mind was easily disturbed. When his mind was disturbed, naturally his mood would be easily controlled by Princess Taiping. Therefore, Yang Fan had already thought of the most effective way to deal with her, turning from guest to host, turning from defense to offense. Yang Fan put on a serious face and said, "Originally, I wouldn't be late, but unfortunately I met an old friend at the door just now, and was delayed for a while." Princess Taiping slightly frowned and said, "Old friend? What old friend do you have?" Yang Fan said, "Of course it's that Prince Consort Wu who chased me on the long street 2 days ago." "Oh, whoosh!" Princess Taiping sat up with a slightly nervous expression. However, seeing Yang Fan's clothes were neat and tidy, without any injury on his body, her nervous expression was swept away. She smiled again and said, "Where is he? He didn't dare to do anything to you, right?" Yang Fan originally wanted to scare her, but Princess Taiping's reaction was somewhat beyond his expectations. Yang Fan couldn't help but feel a little strange and asked, "What did you do to him? I can see that he has a deep hatred for me." But he actually endured it. Princess Taiping made a face at him and proudly said with a smile, "Mountain people have their own brilliant plan, but heaven's secrets cannot be revealed." When she said mountain people, Yang Fan immediately thought of her metaphor of two fishes and asked, "You sent someone to my residence and said that there is a fish on the hook. Once the fish is on the hook, it can also be released, right? I would like to ask, how can this fish escape from the hook?" Princess Taiping slightly narrowed her pair of charming eyes and enchantingly said, "You think." "I will easily tell you." Yang Fan's eyes quickly flashed, and he picked up the half cup of wine that Princess Taiping had placed on the table and gently took a sip. He actually didn't get angry. This time it was Princess Taiping's turn to be surprised. She glanced at Yang Fan in astonishment and slightly rolled her eyes, thinking about his unusual reaction. Yang Fan held that mouthful of wine, tasted it for a moment, and swallowed it. He looked at Princess Taiping again and calmly asked, "Why did you find me again today?" He actually didn't ask how to release one from the vow. Princess Taiping was even more puzzled. Yang Fan's performance was always beyond her expectations. Her feeling of having the pearl of wisdom in her hands gradually became less and less. Of course, she didn't like it. Every time Yang Fan saw her, he couldn't forget about Shanghai One. Every time he anxiously asked how to release one from the vow, she would be sad, jealous, and angry. But she always had a way to provoke Yang Fan and make him even more out of control. But now Yang Fan's performance made his mood like the clouds in the sky, floating here and there, completely unpredictable. Princess Taiping simply didn't know what Yang Fan was thinking, and also didn't know what he wanted to do. Her Royal Highness was a little flustered. She gently bit her lower lip and glanced at Yang Fan. Then she gently straightened her long leg and gently rubbed it on Yang Fan's knee. She put it under his eyelids and again used her old trick. Charmingly and softly said, "I want to ask you to come and drink with me." Her left leg was curled horizontally under the knee of her right leg. Her right leg was perfectly straight, like a fur on the back of a piece of paper. That perfectly straight right leg was stretched horizontally in front of Yang Fan as if to show off. Her snow-white riding pants were tucked into her boots. The line of her calf was beautiful, smooth like a silver sori that had just been caught on the shore, and her thighs were perfectly round like jade pillars, forming a sharp contrast with her slender calf. But there wasn't the slightest sense of awkwardness. It was a pair of thighs with a golden ratio, and the line of her legs was perfectly straight without any protrusions. "Didn't you ask me to go to the Luo River on Valentine's Day?" Yang Fan glanced at her. As he spoke, his hand was already on her calf. Then he slowly tightened his grip. Her calf was just thick enough for him to grasp it with one hand. Princess Taiping's calf muscles were flexible and firm, full of elasticity. But this was only a momentary feeling, because Princess Taiping's leg immediately straightened, and the calf muscles immediately became as hard as iron due to the tension. You. Princess Taiping didn't know if she was surprised and happy or afraid and embarrassed. She had racked her brains. Didn't she just hope that her lover would look back at her and have a little bit of intimacy and love for her? But when all of this really happened, she had a kind of panic and fear. Because in her view, it was impossible for Yang Fan to give in so easily or be captivated by her beauty. Because of this, she was somewhat at a loss of what to do with Yang Fan's unconventional actions. She wanted to pull her leg back, but she was also reluctant to do so. Yang Fan's hand was on her calf. First, he lightly touched it, giving her a kind of ticklish feeling. Then he tightly grasped it, and the burning feeling was like putting her leg on a stove. Princess Taiping couldn't help but shudder. Yang Fan grasped her calf, and then played with her perfectly round ankle. Then he slowly moved up her calf, and gradually slid down to her sensitive, delicate, soft and plump thigh. Yang Fan's speed of speaking was not fast, but there was a kind of unquestionable tyranny in his voice. "I'm asking you a question." Taiping gave in and replied in a low voice, because I can't wait until Valentine's Day." Huh. Yang Fan looked at her again, causing Princess Taiping to be flustered. She lowered her eyes, not daring to look at Yang Fan again. She only stammered, I miss you." When these words came out, her face immediately became as red as an apple. Because of the strength that Yang Fan had displayed, she probably felt a little wronged. Chapter 389. Yang Fan couldn't tell if this sentence was true or false. When the false becomes true, the true becomes false. After all, Princess Taiping's current appearance was very different from the arrogant image that she used to have in the past. Now she looked very much like a weak and easily bullied little wife. "So, you found an excuse to come here and ask me to drink with you?" "Yes." Princess Taiping continued to lower her head and eyes, but the sound coming from her nose became more and more gentle. Yang Fan said, "You are wrong. Also wrong." "What?" Princess Taiping raised her eyes and looked at him with some confusion. Yang Fan said word by word, "I am not drinking with you. You are drinking with me. Do you understand?" Princess Taiping was surprised. "What's the difference?" Yang Fan didn't say anything and just stared at her deeply. Yang Fan's hand had already slid to the depths of her thighs, gently caressing her soft flesh that was like tofu. His hand was very gentle, caressing, definitely the hand of a competent lover, but his eyes were very calm, as sharp as a wolf's. Such a huge contrast produced a very special effect in Princess Taiping's eyes. Yes, she liked this kind of man's eyes. She was addicted to this kind of man, but she didn't want a man to be addicted to her. She was arrogant and noble, so there was only one thing in this world that she couldn't get, and that was to be humble and obedient like a devout slave. She had never had this kind of feeling. Even her most beloved son-in-law Shuai, although she really loved him, she had never received such passion and impulse from him. Only that time, when Yang Fan pressed her on his knees like a child and spanked her buttocks hard, and the stimulation of the ice cubes completely ignited the special qualities hidden in the depths of her body. She liked this kind of feeling of being conquered. Just like when a small beast opened its eyes, it would treat the first creature it saw as its mother. Princess Taiping's arrogant and noble outer shell was broken in the hands of Yang Fan, and her true temperament was only shown to Yang Fan. She had gone from one extreme to the other. In the past, she wanted Yang Fan to be her gigolo. Later, she settled for the next best thing and only wanted to be a pair of secret lovers with him. From that day onwards, what she wanted the most was to be Yang Fan's female slave, a slave that belonged exclusively to him. At this moment, Yang Fan seemed to be repeating what he had done that day. His hands were causing her body to have a strong reaction, and his attitude was tough and domineering. He only needed one response from her: submit. It was the ultimate surrender of happiness. Princess Taiping almost couldn't bear the thought of groveling at his knees. She tried hard to resist the thrill of pleasure and the urge to moan. But her pair of eyes gradually became dreamy and misty, revealing the true feelings of her heart without a doubt. I knew, understand, when her thighs were being stroked and she was about to have a strange reaction in the secret part, and she was about to make a fool of herself in front of her sweetheart. Princess Taiping finally understood. She meekly bowed her head and used the most gentle tone and the most humble address to address this man as subject. Yang Fan smiled and let go of her hand. Then pour the wine. Yes. As soon as Yang Fan's hand left her hand, Princess Taiping was relieved. But there was also a hint of disappointment in her. She obediently got up and didn't dare to lie in front of Yang Fan with that arrogant look anymore. Instead, she knelt down and gently poured a glass of red grape wine for him. She held it with both hands and brought it to her forehead, and presented it to Yang Fan with the most respectful gesture. She had never served anyone before. For a long time, She had always been high up, always being held up, respected and cared for like a goddess. So at this moment, for the first time in her life, she was serving a man with a humble and docile attitude, which made her feel novel and excited. When Yang Fan reached out his hand and took the wine from her hand in a condescending manner, her body couldn't help but tremble. She liked this feeling. At this time, the barrier door was opened with a hua sound. The one who opened the door was the external steward of the princess mansion, Li Yi. He had just received an extremely important news, so he immediately rushed over. If this was Her Royal Highness' boudoir, and Her Royal Highness had summoned a young and strong man, then even if the entire princess residence had been engulfed in a monstrous fire, Li Yi would probably remember to report it first. However, this was a wine shop, and Her Royal Highness would not do anything too excessive here. So, Li Yi wasn't too cautious, plus the news he had just received was too shocking. So he opened the barrier door, and after opening it he regretted it, since they knew that behind that door was the most noble and beautiful Tang Dynasty princess. The noise outside suddenly disappeared. Every guest became polite and firmly adhered to the teachings of Confucius. Don't talk while eating, no one spoke. No one spoke, but no one left either. Usually, they didn't have the opportunity to be so close to any princess, let alone Princess Taiping. Princesses were also born of the first wife, and some are born of concubines. Some are beautiful, and some are mediocre. But for Princess Taiping, only the best title could be used to describe her. She was the most noble and beautiful princess who was loved by all. Now, they were drinking in the same wine shop as this beautiful and noble princess. This experience was enough for them to brag to anyone. What's more, there was the princess lover in that private room. The passion and yearning of the people of the Tang Dynasty, who liked romance and unrestrained, was enough to make them completely ignore the fact that these two people were bound by marriage. Not a single guest left the golden hairpin drunken table, but people kept coming in. Every guest who came in would get a mysterious hint from the waiter at the first moment. When they were confused, they would be kindly reminded by other guests, so they also became the most refined drinkers. They drank wine, but their ears were always pricked up, hoping to hear a word or two from that private room. This was enough for them to brag to others. The manager of the Golden Hairpin Drunken was very excited. Her beautiful and noble highness had actually chosen this place as the place for her tryst with her lover. This alone could push the Golden Hairpin Drunken to the top of the 8 great wine shops in Luoyang. This was a benefit that couldn't be bought with money. At this moment, Li Yi came, and he even opened the barrier door. All the guests and the manager of the Golden Hairpin Drunken who followed in saw the scene. Yang Fan was sitting upright with his legs crossed. In front of him was a table with wine and dishes on it. There was also a long sword that he had brought with him. Princess Taiping, who was more beautiful and noble than the fairies in heaven in their hearts, was kneeling on the side of Yang Fan, holding a cup with both hands and offering wine to him in the most humble manner. Yang Fan, on the other hand, just stretched out a hand and used 2 fingers to take the cup. This was completely the relationship between the most honorable master and the most lowly slave. Even though she was toasting in such a manner, Princess Taiping's figure was still impeccably beautiful, elegant, dignified, noble, and generous. However, in the eyes of others, all of this only served to highlight Yang Fan's status as the master in front of her. This contrast was really too big, until Li Yi reacted and closed the barrier door. All the drinkers outside were still in a daze. Although these poor people had long known that the relationship between Yang Fan and Princess Taiping was unusual. But was this Princess Taiping's gigolo? In front of him, the Honorable Princess Royal Highness was only a maid. Clang! The wine pot in someone's hand fell to the ground, rolled twice on the ground and spilled wine. Someone held chopsticks in his hand, but didn't take the food. He just made a few movements in the air, and then put the empty chopsticks into his mouth, only to find that there was nothing on the chopsticks. Someone hurriedly turned back and wanted to ask his companion to confirm that he was not hallucinating or dreaming. But when he saw the same stunned expression on his companion's face, he knew that there was no need to ask again. "What's the matter?" Princess Taiping saw Li Yi's shocked face, but she didn't panic at all. After Yang Fan took the wine cup, she gently shook her big sleeves, straightened her neck, turned to Li Yi and asked in a noble and elegant manner, "Oh." Li Yi quickly closed his half-open mouth, quickly walked to the front of Princess Taiping, bent down and whispered a few words in her ear. "What?" Princess Taiping's calm and unhurried expression finally disappeared. She gently pursed her lips. Only at this moment, that charming face restored some of the resolute and decisive expression that most women couldn't have in their lifetime. "I know, you can leave," Princess Taiping ordered in a calm tone, but Yang Fan heard the fear and panic hidden under the calmness. Li Yi bowed and walked out backwards. This time he learned to be smart. He only opened the barrier door a little, and as soon as he stepped out, he quickly closed it again. As soon as Li Yi stepped out, Princess Taiping's panicked expression couldn't be hidden anymore. Yang Fan couldn't help but ask, "What's the matter?" Princess Taiping tightly pursed her lips. After a long time, she gently raised her head and looked at him with glistening tears. "My mother Empress made a move against my brother." Yang Fan slightly frowned, and suddenly said involuntarily, "Crown Prince." Princess Taiping whispered, "Yesterday Wei Tuan reported that she found someone secretly practicing witchcraft in the East Palace. Mother Empress sent internal guards with Wei Tuan to search the Crown Prince's palace. In the rooms of Crown Princess Lu and concubine Madame Dou, they found talismans and cursing puppets with Mother Empress's name on them." Yang Fan stared at her and asked, "And then?" Princess Taiping said, "Then Mother Empress ordered people to arrest Madame Dou and Madame Lu and beat them to death. Some servants and maids in the Crown Prince's palace reported that Madame Dou and Madame Lu cursed the Emperor with witchcraft, and it was the Crown Prince's intention. This morning, Mother Empress ordered Lai Junqin to go to the East Palace to investigate this case." Princess Taiping gritted her teeth and smiled coldly. "Lai Junqin is the chief judge. He, Crown Prince brother, is finished." Chapter 390. Yang Fan frowned and said, "How is it possible?" "The Crown Prince has always—" The word coward almost slipped out of his mouth. Yang Fan quickly held it back and said, "The Crown Prince has always been filial. Why would he kill his mother? This is obviously a false accusation." Princess Taiping shook her head gently and said, "This is not important. The important thing is whether the Empress believes it or not, and what the Empress is going to do." She looked at Yang Fan and said sadly, "If the Empress believes it, or if she has made up her mind to kill all the descendants of Li Tang, then the Li family will be finished. The royal family has been killed. Now only the 2 sons of the Empress are left. If the Crown Prince falls today, the Empress doesn't need to do anything. The officials will figure out the Empress's intention. The elder brother in Luzhou will not be spared. The royal family of Li Tang will be wiped out." She closed her eyes and slowly opened them again. She said with tears in her eyes, deceiving her husband, killing her son, killing her grandchild, and slaughtering her husband's entire family. As an empress, I have to do everything. Yang Fan saw that she was so depressed and couldn't help but frown. He said, "We don't know the emperor's intention. Why are you so desperate?" Princess Taiping said sadly, "If it wasn't the empress's intention, who would dare to frame the crown prince? Even Wu Qingxi and Wu Sanxi, who have been coveting the crown prince's position for a long time, would not dare to use such a crazy method." Yang Fan shook his head and said, "Since you still care about your brother, you should try your best to help him. At least, you should first find out whether Wei Tuan-er's accusation to the crown prince was planned by the emperor. You should have some spies in the palace. It shouldn't be difficult to find out this information. That's right. I should at least find out whether this is the Empress's intention. Princess Taiping's eyes suddenly brightened up. She gratefully looked at Yang Fan and gently snuggled up to his side. She opened her arms and hugged his body. She gently rested her chin on his shoulder and gently caressed Yang Fan's cheek. She softly said, "Xiao Fan, help me. Under these circumstances." How could Yang Fan bear to push her away? He could only smile bitterly. "I am but a mere soldier. If you hadn't saved me, I would already be a ghost under Lai Genshin's blade. What can I do to help you?" Princess Taiping gently shook her head and said in a low voice, "Fan Lang, you don't have to flatter yourself. Pooh, you can help me a lot. I don't need you to give me anything that I can get. What I can't get, only you can give me." While Yang Fan was still pondering over the meaning behind Princess Taiping's words, 2 tears of love from Princess Taiping gently fell on his shoulder. She had already left his embrace and turned to walk out. When the barrier door was opened, Princess Taiping did not stop for even a moment. She quickly walked out of the drunken golden hairpin. All the customers in the restaurant immediately held their breath in awe. They silently watched this beautiful princess float out of the main hall like a lithe butterfly, and then simultaneously cast their gazes towards the private room. The door of the private room was open. Yang Fan was sitting cross-legged on the mat. After a moment of silence, he gently picked up a full glass of wine in front of him and drained it in one gulp. He slammed the glass heavily on the table and shouted, "Waiter, settle the bill!" Everyone immediately fell for it. Yang Fan also left. The moment he stepped out of the golden hairpin drunken, the entire restaurant burst into an uproar. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? I originally thought that the encounter between Yang Fan and Prince Consort would be a good show, but I never thought that Prince Consort would actually be terrified. I originally thought that Princess Taiping had a way to control her husband, but looking at her posture just now, the truly powerful one is still Yang Langjiang. Truly a way to control a woman. What's so great about controlling a woman? What's amazing is that princess you has away. Yes, the #1 person in the Tang dynasty. All the customers nodded their heads in excitement. What? Why wasn't anyone angry and denouncing him? What era was this? In this era, Wu Zetian could serve 2 generations of monarchs, and then she could become an emperor and obtain the allegiance of many outstanding people. This was the era when Li Longji's father took in a daughter-in-law, but he could obtain Li Bai's clothes on the clouds, flowers on the flowers, and the dew on the balustrade is dense. If we don't meet at the top of the Jade Mountain, we will meet under the moon on the Jade platform. And by G, we are willing to be birds flying together in the sky, and we are willing to be intertwined branches on the ground. This is the era where the heavens and the earth will never end, and this hatred will never end. This was the era where Hufeng was prevalent, and the Tang people had always worshipped romantic love. Otherwise, they wouldn't have adapted the love story of the cowherd and the weaver girl into a weaver girl meeting her lover in secret, and after lingering on the bed, they would then make fun of the cowherd for not understanding the mood. They first saw Wu Yuji's cowardice, and then saw the 2 of them being so calm. Not only did they not feel the slightest bit of disdain, they instead admired them. Yang Fan's name was finally known by everyone. In the past, people were only concerned about Princess Taiping's affair. As for Yang Fan, who cared who he was? It was just a tool for Her Highness the Princess. Now, they actually knew that the noble and beautiful Princess Taiping was actually fawning over Yang Fan and considered herself a female slave. This was incredible. Even those who originally despised Yang Fan for being a gigolo had a drastic change in attitude at this moment. They admired Yang Fan to the extreme. Originally, there were still some criticisms of him in the streets, but at this time they were all swept away. If anyone dared to say anything bad about him, there would immediately be someone who would jump out to defend him, spitting on that person's face, Don't say that Princess Taiping is a female slave in front of you. If you have the ability to make Her Royal Highness look at you, then you have the ability. You don't have the ability. Stop ting. It was still a small matter, but people had a completely different impression of who was the master and who was the servant, and who was the superior and who was the subordinate. This was the counterattack of a loser. Princess Taiping's father and mother were both emperors, and her brother had also been an emperor. Therefore, all the men in the world were loser in front of this noble princess. Therefore, overnight, Yang Fan became the most respected and envied man in the hearts of all the loser men in the world. It's not the order of Mother Empress. After Princess Taiping returned to the princess mansion, she immediately sent someone to get in touch with the palace. After she got a detailed report, she finally confirmed that before the outbreak of the curse in the Crown Prince Palace, her mother knew nothing about it. Princess Taiping immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Since it was not the order of her mother, her brother still had a chance to survive. However, although it was not the plan of Mother Empress, it had already happened. According to her mother's temperament, even if this person was her own son, she would not hesitate to kill him coldly. If she wanted to save her brother and save the hope of the Li family, how should she start? Princess Taiping paced anxiously in the room. After thinking hard for a long time, she raised her head again and looked at Chengchen on the roof. She stood quietly for a while, and the anxious look on her face was gradually replaced by calmness. She turned around and calmly asked the internal steward, Zhou Min, "Is there any way to get in touch with the East Palace?" Zhou Min shook her head and said, "Princess, it is very difficult. The emperor has blocked the East Palace. Without the emperor's written order, no one can get in or out. And the emperor's written order is in the hands of Lai Junqin. Originally, we had Wei Tuaner, the biggest insider, but now it is she who reported to the Crown Prince. How can she help us communicate with the Crown Prince?" Princess Taiping gently pinched her fingers, making the knuckles make a slight sound one by one. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, "Is it the internal guard who guards the East Palace?" "Yes." Princess Taiping let out a long sigh and murmured, internal guard, Wanner, I have to see her." Zhou Min worriedly said, "Princess, it is not appropriate for you to enter the palace now. The emperor has even suspected the crown prince. If you enter the palace at this time, I'm afraid you will bring trouble to yourself." Princess Taiping replied with a and said, "Then please ask our Shangguan to leave the palace." Zheng Mansion. In the whole of Luoyang, even in the whole of Great Zhou, there was only one mansion that was named after the mistress of the house. Although the Shangguan family was no longer as severely persecuted as in the past, but in name, the Shangguan family had not been rehabilitated. The two words, Shangguan, could not be written on the lintel of the house. Therefore, there was this Zheng Mansion, a mansion that was named after Shangguan Wanner's mother. In an era where even the empress could appear, although naming a mansion after the mistress of the house was somewhat impolite, it did not attract any criticism. Of course, this was also related to the current status of Shangguan Wanner. Just like the mansion of the princess and the prince's son-in-law had always been called the princess mansion, not the prince's son-in-law's mansion. When a woman's status reached a certain level, the etiquette and rules of the world would no longer be binding on them. Men would also feel that it was natural. Madame Zhang was sick, very sick. It was said that after the magic hands Jiang Yechuan treated her, he felt that it was very difficult. Now he simply lived in the Zheng mansion and focused on treating Madame Zheng. Filial piety was the most important of all virtues. This rule was the most valued since ancient times, even for the emperor. Especially for the emperor, who was experiencing the incident of his own son trying to kill him with a curse. He especially valued filial piety. Therefore, as soon as Shangguan Wanner mentioned it to her, she generously agreed and allowed Wanner to return to the mansion to visit. In the backyard of the Zheng mansion, Shangguan Wanner's boudoir, the embroidery building, although Wanner had not lived here for more than half a month, since she was the young mistress of the Zheng mansion, and since she was still unmarried, this embroidery building was naturally kept for her. Moreover, there were people who cleaned it every day. When Shangguan Wanner returned to the Zheng mansion, she hurried to the backyard to visit her mother's illness. But after only half an hour, she quietly appeared in her own embroidery building. Except for a few of the most trusted family members in the Zheng mansion, others thought that, at this moment, Shangguan Wanner was still in front of Madame Zheng's sickbed. "What do you want to see me for?" Shangguan Wanner was neither servile nor overbearing. She was not affectionate, but she was not hostile either. Princess Taiping saved her lover, but she also took advantage of her perilous situation to force her to swear to leave Yang Fan. She could maintain this kind of attitude, which was already very gentlemanly. Princess Taiping had obviously expected her attitude, but now the situation was urgent. She did not care about being polite or trying to repair the relationship with Shangguan Wanner. She directly stated her purpose of coming and anxiously said, "I want to see the Crown Prince, or let my people see the Crown Prince. No one in the palace is more powerful than you. Only you can help me." Shangguan Wanner was silent for a moment. She gently raised her eyebrows and stared at the face of her former best friend. She coldly asked, "See the Crown Prince? Do you know how much risk there is in this? I can help you, but why should I help you?" Princess Taiping showed a trace of a bitter smile and said, "I knew that you would wait for me here. So, let's talk about the deal." Chapter 391. The Crown Prince's palace was surrounded by internal guards. The Crown Prince's palace was filled with officials and bailiffs from the imperial censor. Although no one had restricted the Crown Prince's freedom, the Crown Prince had long ago shut himself in his chambers. Even his meals were delivered to him, and he refused to take a step outside. He was fearfully waiting for his mother's punishment. The Crown Prince was the heir to the throne, and the heir to the throne had his own government hall. This was where he received the officials of the Eastern Palace. When the officials of the court wanted to see the Crown Prince, they would meet here. Li Dan had also lived here when he was the emperor. Back then, Wu Yuji and the others had used both carrot and stick to force him to submit to Wu Zetian. Now, this place was Lai Junshin's court. In the court, Lai Junshin sat majestically. A dozen attendants knelt in front of him. They were all the Crown Prince's trusted aides. Lai Junshin had Judge Wang Desho read out the Crown Prince's crimes and the confessions of the attendants of the Crown Princess Lu and concubine Do. He said in a clear voice, "The Crown Prince's crimes may be hidden from others, but not from those who serve him. Logically, as the Crown Prince's attendants, if the Crown Prince commits treason, you should be beheaded. But according to the laws of the Zhou dynasty, if you commit treason and confess immediately, your crimes will be reduced by one level. Then you will not have to die. This is your only chance to live. Now confess." The dozen or so attendants knelt in the hall and were silent. Lai Junshin waited quietly for a moment and laughed. "Good, no one confesses? Then I can only use torture." One of the attendants gathered his courage and argued, "Deputy Minister Lai, the Crown Prince has not rebelled at all." Lai Junshin slammed the gavel and shouted, "Come! Each of you will be flogged 20 times. Torture." This was the Crown Prince's palace. Lai Junshin could not bring all the strange instruments of torture from the imperial censor. Also, he was not clean at the moment. Even though he was eager to perform a meritorious deed and resolve his crisis, he was more afraid of giving others an excuse. So he only used the flogging. However, even if it was just a cane punishment, it was not something that could be easily endured. More than a dozen eunuchs were pressed to the ground and flogged. Screams immediately sounded in the political affairs hall. Lai Junshin's gaze slowly moved across the faces of the eunuchs. He didn't believe that this bunch of spineless eunuchs would be so unyielding that not a single one of them would confess. Crown Prince Li Dan had feigned calmness for the first 2 days, But as Lai Junchin entered the palace to interrogate him, he finally lost his cool. He shut himself in the crown prince's palace for the next 2 days, not even leaving his room. His heart was filled with anxiety, and his mouth was covered in blisters. He wanted to pray and ask his ancestors to bless him, but he didn't even dare to kneel and pray now. He was worried that others would think that he was cursing the Queen Mother. At this time he had no time to grieve for Madame Do and Madame Lu, who had just died. He couldn't even save his own life. "Crown Prince!" Lan Feier quietly entered the bedchamber and called out softly. "Get out!" Li Dan flew into a rage. He didn't show any mercy, even though Lan Feier had become the person by his bed. Lan Feier jumped in fright. Her beautiful eyes filled with tears of grievance. She pursed her lips and sobbed. "Crown Prince, someone from Princess Taiping's residence wants to see you." "What?" Li Dan hurriedly ran out from behind the screen and exclaimed in surprise, "Did the Queen Mother ask Ling Yue to send someone?" Lan Feier shook her head and said in a low voice, "Princess Taiping was extremely worried when she heard that the Crown Prince was in trouble. However, the Crown Prince's palace has been surrounded and her people can't enter. That's why she went through a lot of trouble and asked for the approval of the inner guards. Crown Prince, the person can't stay for long. You." No, I won't see him." Li Dan turned pale with fright. "Chase him away. Hurry up and chase him away. It'll be troublesome if the Queen Mother's people find out. This Taiping is too outrageous. Isn't he just causing trouble for me? Hurry up and chase him away." Lan Feier looked at him silently. She looked at this son of the Son of Heaven, the crown prince of the great Zhou, who had once been the emperor of the Tang dynasty. Her eyes were filled with disappointment. No matter what, this crown prince would be her man from now on. Who didn't want their man to be a man of indomitable spirit? But if he wasn't born into an imperial family, then what would he be? In his panic, Li Dan didn't notice the disappointment and disdain in Lan Feier's eyes. Seeing her stand there without moving, Li Dan was even more furious. However, he didn't dare to raise his voice. He could only growl in a low voice, "What are you still standing there for? Even you want to harm me? Hurry up and go." Lan Feier silently turned around and walked out of the hall. Li Dan scurried around the hall like a bird, startled by the twang of a bow. Suddenly, he quickly chased after Lan Feier. Just as she was about to step out of the bedchamber, he grabbed her arm and asked in a trembling voice, Was the person Taiping sent discovered by the censorate?" Lan Feier said he pretended to be a eunuch who delivered food to the censorate. The censorate didn't suspect anything, but because of this he couldn't stay for long. He had to pack up the food and leave, so he said he could only see the crown prince for a moment. Li Dan fiercely grabbed at his hair, his heart struggling. He was only 30 years old, but his hair was already white. He looked like an old man with one foot in the grave. Li Dan gritted his teeth and struggled for a moment. Suddenly he said, "Bring him to see me, quickly." Lan Feier happily agreed and quickly walked out. Soon, Li Yi appeared in front of Li Dan, dressed in a eunuch's uniform. He was a eunuch to begin with. Before Princess Taiping's marriage, he had been serving in the palace, so it wasn't difficult for him to pretend to be a eunuch. Li Dan looked him up and down, puzzled. "You are one of Taiping's people." Li Yi took out something from his bosom. Li Dan snatched it and quickly opened it. It was a jade disc, the one that the court had conferred the title of princess on Li Lingyue. Li Dan let out a long breath and nervously gripped the jade disc. He anxiously asked, "Taiping sent you to see me. What does he want to say?" Li Yi said, "Crown Prince, this servant cannot stay for long, so I ask that the Crown Prince listen carefully to every word this servant says. If the Crown Prince does as the princess says, there may be a chance of survival. If the Crown Prince continues to wait without doing anything, then the Crown Prince is doomed." Li Dan's face paled even more. He trembled as if he was suffering from a disease. Fine. Speak quickly. Is there still no one? Lai Junshin clasped his hands behind his back as he slowly paced around the hall. Every word he spoke produced an echo effect in the empty hall. This made Lai Junshin feel as if he was high above the masses. It's fine if you don't speak, you murderous dogs who won't shed tears until you see the coffin. Someone use the rod. The servants, who had just retreated with their punishment sticks, came up with another rod. These rods were 5 small round wooden rods, each with a tough and powerful rope wrapped around the top and bottom. When the 5 fingers of a person were inserted into the rods, the fingers could be firmly clamped down with force from both ends. Lai Junshin stopped in front of an eunuch who was groaning in pain and lying on the ground. He said in a gloomy voice, "I have plenty of ways to wear you out, and I have even more time. If you obediently confess, you won't have to suffer this physical pain and may even be spared from death. Otherwise," he had already noticed that there were 3 people who couldn't bear the pain and were crying the loudest. The eunuch in front of him was one of them. As he spoke to this eunuch, he looked coldly at the other, causing the eunuch's face to turn ashen and his body to tremble. The eunuch's lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he lowered his head and didn't say anything. Lai Junshin smiled faintly. It was like a gust of cold wind gently brushing past his face. His smile quickly changed from a curved curve to a cold expression. Lai Junfo lightly spat out 2 words. "Continue the torture." Crown Prince? The eunuchs and palace maids responsible for sweeping the courtyard were trembling with fear as they suddenly saw a person run out of the Crown Prince's palace. This person was wearing a small white robe, barefooted, and had disheveled hair. He looked like a madman, and they couldn't help but stop in shock. Upon closer inspection, they recognized that this person was the current Crown Prince, Li Dan. They couldn't help but be even more shocked. Li Dan's eyes were fixed on him. He ignored them and ran barefooted toward the palace gates. "Crown Prince, please stop." Lan Yiqing suddenly appeared at the palace gates and raised his sword in front of him to block him. Li Dan roared, "How dare you? How dare you block this prince? This prince is the current Crown Prince. If this prince wants to see the emperor, who dares to block this prince's path?" Lan Yiqing's delicate eyebrows furrowed slightly. He leaned back a bit to prevent Li Dan's spittle from splashing onto his face. Lan Yiqing very politely said, "This humble subject is guarding the palace gates under the emperor's orders. Without the emperor's decree, no one is allowed to enter or leave. Please forgive me, Crown Prince." Li Dan suddenly burst into tears when he heard this. "I want to see the emperor. I want to see Mother. Let me out." Lan Yiqing waved his hand. 2 inner guards rushed out from the side of the door and dragged Li Dan back. Li Dan wailed, "You can't stop me. I want to see the emperor. I want to see Mother. Mother, Dan wants to see you." The 2 guards dragged Li Dan through the gates and threw him aside. Li Dan staggered to his feet and said in a sorrowful voice, "Fine, if you won't let me see Mother, then I'll die in front of you. Men, bring me the white silk." At this time, Gowing heard the news and rushed over. After listening to Lan Yiqing's brief introduction, she quickly dashed through the gates and said to Li Dan, "Crown Prince, we are only following orders. Please don't make things difficult for us. How about this? If the Crown Prince has anything to say, please tell this humble subject. This subject will report it to the Emperor on behalf of the Crown Prince. How about this?" "I have nothing to say." Li Dan covered his face and collapsed to the ground in tears. Tears and snot flowed down his face as he said, "Li Dan only wishes to beg Mother to abolish my position in the East Palace and demote me to a commoner. Li Dan has no other requests. I only wish to live a commoner's life and spend the rest of my life in the mountains. Mother, please grant my wish." After saying this, Li Dan knelt on the ground and began kowtowing in the direction of Wanxiang Divine Palace. At this time, in a side hall of the Crown Prince's palace, a young eunuch said to Taichung Temple's musician and Jinzong. "Are you really willing to do this?" 2 days ago, and Jinzong had tearfully recited the late crown prince Li Xian's Huang Tai Guafai in front of Li Dan. Li Dan had ordered him to be beaten and had been recuperating here ever since. Hearing the young eunuch's words, and Jinzong excitedly crawled up and said, "I am willing. If I can use my lowly life to exchange for the crown prince's safety, even if I have to climb a mountain of knives or enter a sea of fire, I am willing to do it." The young eunuch said, "Good. Since that is the case, He lowered his voice and said a few words, his face revealing a very feminine and sweet smile. "After this is done, your parents and brothers, old and young, will be taken care of by that noble person. As long as that noble person is alive, your family will not have to worry about food or clothing." After saying this, he took out a shiny dagger from his boot and presented it to Jinzong with both hands. Chapter 392. Gao Ying held her sword as she stood in front of Wu Zetian. She repeated the crown prince's words to Wu Zetian without missing a word. Wu Zetian raised her eyes and calmly glanced at her. She asked, "Is that all?" Gao Ying replied, "Yes." The crown prince said that he was framed and could not defend himself. "He only asks your majesty to be merciful and demote him to a commoner so that he can spend the rest of his life in the mountains. If your majesty does not agree—" Wu Zetian lowered her eyes and asked coldly, "What if we do not agree?" Gao Ying said in a low voice, "The crown prince said that he would rather die than bear the name of being unfilial for attempting to kill his own mother. Then he is willing to die to prove his loyalty." Wu Zetian was silent for a moment. Then she suddenly laughed softly. "Ha ha, this son of ours." Gao Ying didn't know why Wu Zetian was sighing. She didn't dare to continue and stood with her hands at her sides. Wu Zetian was silent for a moment before sighing softly. "It has been hard on him. This son of ours has always been weak, but now he finally has some courage." It could be seen that Wu Zetian's expression was one of admiration. She stood up from the couch and said, "Forget it. As a son, he doesn't want to bear the name of killing his own mother. As a mother, how can I bear the crime of forcing my own son to die? Come, we will go see him and see what our crown prince wants." Wei Tuaner wanted to say something to stop her, but when she saw that Shanghai Wana had already stepped forward to support Wu Zetian, she swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. She also quickly stepped forward to support Wu Zetian. At the same time, she quickly signaled to one of the crown prince's trusted eunuchs. Eunuch Jing hurried over to the crown prince palace after receiving the message from the young eunuch. Unfortunately, even he couldn't enter the crown prince palace now. No matter how he tried to persuade Lan Yiqing just stood in front of the palace with his arms crossed. He didn't shake his head or nod his head. There was a sweet smile on his face, making it hard to be angry. The official was so anxious that he scratched his ears and cheeks, but there was nothing he could do. Right at this moment, the little eunuch who brought the news gently pulled the corner of his clothes and sent a look into the distance. The official turned his head to look and saw the emperor's yellow silk umbrella cover slowly moving over from the distance. He could only give a dejected sigh and left unhappily with the little eunuch. In the political affairs hall of the Eastern Palace, Lai Junqin was so engrossed in asking questions about the case that he forgot to eat or sleep. He didn't even eat a few bites of lunch. Just from this action, it could be seen that he was really diligent in political affairs. "There is a limit to my patience. If you still refuse to confess, I will continue to torture you. Even if you die, you will be charged as accomplices to the rebels, and your families will be implicated as well. You better think carefully." Lai Junqin's dark and cold gaze swept across the faces of the Eastern Palace servants, who were covered in cuts and bruises. Finally, it landed on the 3 servants whose willpower was already wavering. He pointed at one of the 3 and said, "Interrogate them one by one. Leave one behind. Take the others away first and let them reflect." Lai Junqin knew that the three of them had already developed a fear of punishment. However, with so many of their companions in front of them, everyone was gritting their teeth and holding on. Thus, they could not immediately make the decision to betray their master. If only they were left in front of them, a little torture and intimidation might be enough to force them to confess. Just at this moment, a loud shout suddenly came from the front of the hall. "Get out of the way. I want to see the Deputy Prime Minister. I have something to say." Lai Junchen raised his head and saw a thin man wearing a green robe rush in from the entrance of the hall like a gust of wind. The political affairs hall of the Eastern Palace was very spacious, for yamen runners stood to the left and right of the door. They had not expected that someone would dare to barge in. When they realized that someone had forced their way in, it was too late to stop them. The green-robed man pushed aside one of the runners in front of him and rushed into the hall. The Eastern Palace servants, kneeling in the hall, all turned their heads to look. They saw that this person was the musician of the Eastern Palace, and Jinzong glanced at Lai Junchen. He bent down and pulled out a sharp dagger from his boot. Lai Junchen cried out in shock, "Assassin!" The 4 martial arts masters that Lai Junchen had hired with a lot of money were standing to his left and right. Seeing the commotion, 2 of them immediately flashed to his side. The other 2 leaped to the table and pulled out their knives to point at Jinzong. And Jinzong held the knife in his hand but did not rush forward. Instead, he raised his voice and said in a clear voice, "Why not? Deputy Prime Minister Lai, the Crown Prince, is loyal, filial, and benevolent. He has no intention of rebelling. Deputy Prime Minister Lai, how can you bear to use torture to frame me? I am a musician of the Eastern Palace. The affairs of the court have nothing to do with me. But I really cannot bear to see the Crown Prince be framed and killed." He raised the dagger and shouted loudly. Wei Tuaner coveted the position of the Crown Prince's consort. She begged the Crown Prince, but failed. She harbored hatred in her heart and decided to take revenge. The Crown Prince is innocent. The Crown Prince's consort and concubine Do are also innocent. I am willing to cut open my stomach and dig out my heart to show my sincerity for the Crown Prince. And Jinzong finished speaking and waved his knife to cut open his own abdomen. Blood spurted out, and Jinzong ruthlessly cut open his own abdomen horizontally. This person was really a ruthless person. After one cut, he did not stop. He made another vertical cut from his lower abdomen to his chest. His entire body was immediately stained with blood. Even though Lai Junchen was used to seeing criminals mutilated, he had never seen someone treat himself so ruthlessly. For a moment he was stunned. And Jinzong was a musician of the palace. The musicians of the palace were all the best singers in the world. Their voices were very penetrating, and Jinzong also timed it well. He waited for Wu Zetian to enter the Eastern Palace. The moment she arrived, he rushed into the political affairs hall to commit suicide. His cry was sorrowful and powerful. Not a single word was missed by Wu Zetian's ears. Wu Zetian was about to rush to the Crown Prince's palace when she suddenly heard this cry. She couldn't help but turn around and rush to the political affairs hall. Wei Tuan framed the Crown Prince's consort and concubine. She also framed the Crown Prince. She never thought that there would be a day when she would be framed. She heard someone shouting that she coveted the position of the Crown Prince's consort. She flattered the Crown Prince, but was rejected. That's why she wanted revenge. She couldn't help but be angry and anxious. Although the Crown Prince was noble, the Crown Prince's consort would be the future empress. It was a position that all the women in the world dreamed of. But who would be willing to be the Crown Prince's consort for a precarious Crown Prince like Li Dan? She, Wei Tuan, would covet the position of the Crown Prince's consort, which had little hope. Wei Tuan was so angry that her face turned red. She wanted to explain, but when she saw Wu Zetian walking quickly towards the political affairs hall, She knew that if she was too impatient, she would appear guilty. She could only force herself to endure. But no matter how much she wanted to act as if she had a clear conscience, her expression appeared unnatural. And Jinzong's decisive and terrifying method of cutting open his chest and abdomen frightened everyone in the hall, especially the 3 eunuchs who originally had the intention to confess. As soon as they heard Lai Junshin's order to bring the other eunuchs away, they secretly let out a sigh of relief. As long as they were not in front of them, they did not have to bear too much guilt. Now that they saw Jinzong's magnificent feat, they were truly stunned. Loyalty and filial piety were the noblest qualities of this era. In their hearts, being a loyal and devoted servant was the greatest value in their lives. Today, a musician who could not have been implicated in this case had stood up and died for the crown prince. He had done what they should have done, but they had not. They could not help but feel ashamed. Lai Junshin was stunned for a while before he swallowed and shouted, This person must be the crown prince's death warrior. He is using this action to exonerate the crown prince. Guards, drag him away. This official will not let this affect my work. Just as he said this, a loud shout came from the entrance of the hall. His Majesty has arrived! Following the voice, Shang Guanwan, and Wei Tuan supported Wu Zetian and walked into the hall. Behind them, many palace maids and guards followed. Lai Junshin was shocked. He quickly left the table and prostrated himself on the ground. Subject Lai Junshin greets Your Majesty. Judge Wang Desho and the officials of the censorate all bowed to Wu Zetian. The eunuchs of the Eastern Palace who were being interrogated suddenly saw the emperor arrive and were immediately stunned. When they saw the officials of the censorate bowing to the emperor, they unconsciously turned around and wanted to kowtow to the emperor. But when they turned around and were about to kowtow, one of them suddenly had a stroke of luck. Perhaps it was because Jinzong's heroic feat had raised his courage, and he suddenly wailed, Everyone, the crown prince is wrongly accused. This servant is wrongly accused. Once this person started, the dozen or so servants immediately cried and kowtowed. Everyone, the crown prince does not have any rebellious intentions. The crown princess does not have any rebellious intentions. Lai Junshin used torture to force us to confess to crimes that did not exist. Everyone is wise. Please help the crown prince. Please help newbie. Wei Tuan was a female official second only to Shang Guanwan in the inner palace. Under her power, no one dared to follow up on Jinzong's topic. But right now they were in Lai Junshin's hands. Since they had no way out, they might as well use this rare opportunity to bite him. Lai Junshin gritted his teeth in hatred. But with his status, he could not argue with the eunuchs. He could only kneel on the ground and not speak. Wu Zetian looked at Jinzong, who was lying on the ground. Seeing his intestines protruding from his body and the terrible state, she couldn't help but be moved. She sighed softly and said in a deep voice, This is a loyal servant. Use Zhen's imperial carriage to carry him to the imperial hospital. Zhen wants him alive. After Wu Zetian gave the order, people immediately ran outside and carried Wu Zetian's step carriage in. They carefully carried Jinzong, whose intestines were protruding and breathing weakly, up and hurriedly left. Hearing Wu Zetian's order, Lai Junshin couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. But he was still kneeling on the ground and didn't dare to raise his head. He only saw a corner of the dragon robe appear in his line of sight. Under the dragon robe was a pair of feet, so he lowered his head even more humbly. Wu Zetian's gaze swept across the servants, who were covered in wounds and had bloody fingers. Then she looked at Lai Junshin, kneeling at her feet. She sighed and said, Lai Junshin, you have failed to live up to Zhen's trust. Lai Junshin originally wanted to argue, but the thought only turned a few times in his mind. Thinking of how Wu Zetian had addressed him, he swallowed his words and corrected himself. Yes, this subject is guilty. This subject was anxious to solve the case and used rough methods. I have failed the Emperor's expectations. Your Majesty, please punish me. Wu Zetian didn't pay attention to him. She only looked at the puddle of blood on the ground. She stood there blankly for a moment before she turned and walked out. Shang Guanwan glanced at Wei Tuan on the other side. She saw that Wei Tuan originally pretty and bright red face was now as pale as paper. Chapter 393. Wu Zetian came to the crown prince's bedchamber with heavy steps. She frowned when she saw the tightly shut doors. Where is the crown prince? Lan Fei quickly replied, Your Majesty, the crown prince has been in seclusion for the past few days. He refuses to see anyone, and even his meals are delivered by me. Just now, the crown prince suddenly clamored to see Your Majesty. After I persuaded him to come back, he hid in the palace and refused to come out. Open the door, Wu Zetian ordered. Yes, Lan Fei quickly replied and gently pushed the door open. Wait here, Wu Zetian ordered. If everyone goes in alone, Tuaner is worried. Wei Tuaner said anxiously. Wu Zetian glanced at her and said, This son of mine doesn't have the guts to kill his own mother in public. What's there to worry about? Wu Zetian walked into the crown prince's bedchamber. Shanghai Wan glanced at Wei Tuan and stood quietly by the door. When Wu Zetian walked into the palace, she felt that it was dark and gloomy. She couldn't help but furrow her brow and call out, Dana? There was a moment of silence before a frightened voice came from behind the screen. Who's calling me? Who's calling me? Wu Zetian was slightly angered and raised her voice. Dan, can't you recognize your mother's voice? A cry of alarm came from behind the screen, followed by a series of clattering sounds as Li Dan ran out with disheveled hair. Wu Zetian looked at him. Her son was dressed in a white shirt with disheveled hair. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with fear. His sleeves were hanging down and he was in a very sorry state. Wu Zetian's gaze slowly landed on Li Dan's feet. He was barefooted and didn't even wear shoes. Mother. Li Dan hurriedly bowed, but Wu Zetian waved her hand impatiently. All right, there's only you and me here. There's no need to stand on ceremony. She turned around and sat down on a couch. As soon as she sat down, Li Dan threw herself at her feet and hugged her leg. She wailed loudly, Mother, Danner would never dare to have any evil intentions or try to harm the Empress. I'm innocent, I'm really innocent. Wu Zetian's body also swayed slightly as he hugged her leg and cried. She said calmly, But someone found talismans and puppets in your palace. Li Dan's tears streamed down his face. I'm innocent. I've never seen those things. The Lu matriarch and the Do matriarch. Wu Zetian suddenly interrupted him and asked, What's going on with you and Tuan Li Dan was a little confused. He raised his head and wiped his tears. Tuan What's going on between Tuan and Miss Tuan Wu Zetian's gaze sharpened. She stared at him and said, Does Tuan want to be your crown princess? Li Dan blurted out, No. Facing Wu Zetian's sharp gaze, Li Dan stuttered, Son. Once, Miss Tuan was only in charge of the expenses of the crown prince's palace. Sometimes Wu Zetian saw that his eyes were wandering. She sneered and said, I already know everything. Li Dan was stunned. He suddenly kowtowed and said, Mother, that was only Miss Tuan idea. I didn't agree. Mother chose the crown princess for me. How could I dare to make decisions on my own? Miss Tuan is Mother's trusted aide. How could I dare to marry her? Li Dan seemed to be scared out of his wits. He hurriedly explained, Miss Tuan said that as long as I wrote a secret edict for her mother to make her empress after 1,000 years, she would be able to take more care of the East Palace. She would also put in a few good words for me, but I didn't dare to agree to her. I'm not the emperor. How can I write a secret edict? I understand the rules. Don't say any more. Wu Zetian didn't expect to hear such words from her son. She was extremely angry at first, but her anger soon disappeared. Instead, it was endless sorrow. I'm really old. Even the people closest to me are making plans after my death. My nephews are worried about my throne. The ministers are worried about the ownership of the country after my death. And Tuan wants to be the empress. Wu Zetian gradually calmed down. She stared at Li Dan and said, "Why haven't I heard you mention this before?" Li Dan lowered his head uneasily under Wu Zetian's sharp gaze. He stammered, I don't know how to say it. I don't have any proof. Tuan is Mother's most trusted aide. Wu Zetian looked at him. Li Dan's face was full of fear. His lips were chapped, and there were many blisters on them. He looked extremely haggard. Wu Zetian couldn't help but sigh. She faintly said, "Could it be that I really trust an outsider more than I trust my own son?" She seemed to be asking herself, but also seemed to be asking Li Dan. But Li Dan didn't dare to answer. He only deeply kowtowed and fell to the ground in silence. Wu Zetian slowly lowered her head. She looked at Li Dan, who was prostrating on the ground. Her voice became calm again. Dan, tell Mother that you don't want to be the crown prince anymore? Li Dan hurriedly said, "Yes. I have neither virtue nor talent. I have let down the crown prince position. In addition, your son's daily life is not very orderly, often causing unnecessary trouble, affecting the relationship between your son and Mother. So, Mother, please remove your son's crown prince title." Wu Zetian slowly raised her head. She looked at the ray of sunlight that shone through the half-opened palace gate. She asked blankly, "If I remove you from the crown prince position, who will inherit my country?" Li Dan was overjoyed and said, "Seventh brother is in Fangzhou too." Or, "Prince Wei and Prince Liang are also good." He didn't finish his sentence before he was forced back by Wu Zetian's cold and sharp gaze. He anxiously lowered his head again. Wu Zetian was silent for a moment. She said, "I have no intention of changing the crown prince." Li Dan didn't dare to raise his head. He only nodded. Wu Zetian continued, "However, you are indeed not very careful in the way you handle things. You have given people a lot of ammunition. Even if you have no intention of rebelling, it is inevitable that people will slander you. I may not believe it once or twice, but if it is said too much, how can I not be suspicious and give others an opportunity to take advantage of?" She slowly stood up and said, "How about this? You continue to be the crown prince. In order to prevent people from saying that you have bad intentions, you should be more careful in the future." Li Dan was still lying on the ground. He didn't move at all, like a carved stone turtle. However, his hands, which were hidden in his sleeves, were tightly gripping the ground. If not for this, he would not have been able to suppress his ecstasy. He had made it through this ordeal without any mishaps. Wu Zetian's calm voice still echoed in the palace. "I know that there will always be people who want to catch you. In the future, you can live in the East Palace in peace. Dismiss all the subordinates in the East Palace. Stop receiving officials every 10 days. Li Dan hurriedly said, "Yes." Wu Zetian glanced at him and said, "You are the crown prince. You haven't even inherited the throne, but I have already made the crown grandson. I have also made all the other grandsons princes. No wonder people hate you. How about this? The crown grandson will be demoted by 2 ranks, and the other 4 grandsons will be demoted by 1 rank. The crown grandson and the princes will be demoted to Junwang. There will also no longer be special princely mansions for them. The prince's guards and guards of honor will all be removed. Bring them to the East Palace to keep you company. This will save you from being lonely in the East Palace." Li Dan hurriedly said, "Many thanks, Mother, for fulfilling my wish." Wu Zetian didn't say anything else. Li Dan lay on the ground for a long time. He quietly raised his head. At some point, Wu Zetian had already left his bedroom. Li Dan still maintained his kneeling position. He was silent for a long time with both hands on the ground. An indescribable smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. He used to be the emperor. When he was the emperor, he wasn't a qualified emperor. He was now the crown prince. When he was the crown prince, he wasn't a qualified crown prince either. However, he was a qualified actor. Crown Prince Li Xian and Crown Prince Li Hong were both smart and capable people. When they were still crown princes, they were praised by the officials. They said that they would definitely become virtuous rulers. But what happened in the end? They died before they even became virtuous rulers. However, he was still alive and well. He really didn't have any great ambitions. The empire of his ancestors and the hegemony of the emperor were all **T. As long as he could live, he would be satisfied. However, it wasn't easy to live by the side of such a mother. When Wu Zetian walked out of the crown prince's bedroom, Shanghai Wan and the palace maids and eunuchs secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Wu Zetian didn't say a word. They helped her out of the crown prince's palace. There was already a carriage in front of the palace gate. Wu Zetian boarded the carriage and said only 3 words: "Hall of Flying Fragrance." A large group of people escorted Wu Zetian to Hall of Flying Fragrance. Wu Zetian sat down and glanced at Wei Tuan. She said lightly, "Madame Lu and Madame Dou are dead. The crown prince doesn't even have a single person by his side. Tuan, or what do you think? I will appoint you as the crown princess. What do you think?" Wei Tuaner was so scared that her legs turned to jelly. She knelt on the ground and said fearfully, "Everyone, I only want to serve by your side. I don't want to be the crown princess." Wu Zetian sneered, "I am old and don't have many more years to live. You are in the prime of your life. How many years can you guard me? If you don't want to be the crown princess, then I will grant you the position of empress. You will be the mother of the world. What do you think?" Hearing such words, Wei Tuan was frightened out of her wits. She banged her head on the ground, and in a short while her fair and clear forehead was bruised, with drops of blood seeping out. Wu Zetian waved her hand and said in disgust, "Drag her away!" Wei Tuaner finally cried out, "Everyone, I am wronged! I am wronged!" This servant was set up by someone. In the midst of her cries, Wei Tuan was dragged out of the main hall by 2 guards. Wu Zetian sneered and turned to Shanghai Wan. She said in a deep voice, "Bring some men to search the residence of that **He. Also, find out who ordered her to frame the crown prince." Chapter 394. Wei Tuan was a woman. Her petite and light body was supported by the strong arms of 2 strong guards. She was as light as a feather. In a moment, she was dragged out of Flying Fragrance Hall and pressed onto the ground. Then her hands and feet were pressed together and she was firmly pinned down. Following that, 2 fat eunuchs with red lacquered staffs slowly walked over. The 2 thick and heavy wooden staffs slammed heavily in front of her, making a pong sound. Wei Tuaner was so frightened that her delicate body suddenly trembled. The ground was very clean. Wei Tuaner's white and delicate face was pressed against the cool and smooth bricks. It seemed that there wasn't even a speck of dust on her. However, Wei Tuan seemed to have touched the dirtiest thing. She tried her best to raise her head, not wanting her face to be pressed against the smooth bricks, because through the cracks in the bricks, she seemed to smell a thick scent of blood. Just a few days ago, the Crown Princess Lusher and concubine Dosher had been beaten to death here. Their blood had seeped deeply into the cracks in the bricks. The palace maids could wash the bricks here clean, but they could not wash away the scent of blood that had seeped into the mud. This servant is innocent. Wei Tuan was scared out of her wits and started to scream. It was a pity that Wu Zetian, who was in Flying Fragrance Hall, did not seem to hear a single word. The 2 guards and the 2 disciplinary eunuchs heard her, but their faces were wooden and expressionless. Just a moment ago, Wei Tuaner was fully deserving of the title of chief eunuch in the palace. She was second only to Wu Zetian and Shangguan Wanner. These 2 fat eunuchs did not even have the right to kneel before her and lick her toes. But now she had become a prisoner. Wanner walked over lightly. Even though she was still dressed in men's clothing, she had a feeling of being as light as a cloud. When Wei Tuaner saw her, jealousy flashed through her eyes that could not be concealed. All along, she had set Wanner as her goal to surpass. It was a pity that no matter how hard she tried, she could not surpass Wanner. What was more hateful was that Shanghai Wanner had never even regarded her as a competitor. She could not endure such humiliation. The reason she was willing to do this was, of course, the great wealth had moved her. But there was an even more important reason. She needed the support of the outside court. She already knew that she would never be able to surpass Wanner in talent. If she did not have the support of the outside court, she would not be able to win the queen's favor as she had for Wanner. She twisted her body and cried at Wanner, "Sister, save me, sister, save me. Tuaner is innocent, I really am innocent. Tuaner never tried to seduce the crown prince. Tuaner doesn't want to be the crown princess. Tuaner is loyal to everyone." Wei Tuaner's eyes were filled with hatred and jealousy. She quickly turned into a pitiful and helpless look. Shangguan Wanner sighed and stopped in front of Wei Tuaner. She was not stupid at all. It was true that she did not fight, but Wei Tuaner had always been hostile towards her. Sometimes she would say greedy things about her in front of Empress Wu. She would not be fooled by Wei Tuaner's current appearance. She would not want to kill Tuaner because of this, but she knew that Tuaner's life was not in her hands. If Tuaner fell, she would not step on her, but she would also not lend a helping hand. Ever since Yang Fan was innocently imprisoned and almost died in prison, her heart seemed to have hardened. Wanner interrupted her words and quietly asked, "Everyone should know who ordered you?" Wei Tuaner shook her head forcefully and said loudly, "Tuaner did not do anything. Tuaner was wronged." She could not admit it. She knew that as long as she confessed, she would be dead. Wu Zetian would not tolerate others deceiving and using her like this. Tuaner still hoped that with her many years of hard work in serving Wu Zetian and the affection she had with Wu Zetian, the Empress would change her mind and spare her life. Shangguan Wanner stood in front of her for a while, other than crying and complaining. Wei Tuaner only talked about how she served the Empress with all her heart. She clenched her teeth and refused to admit that she was ordered by someone to frame the crown prince. Shangguan Wanner sighed softly. Her bright eyes glanced at the 2 fat eunuchs, and then she turned and walked away. She walked down the white marble stone steps and said to Lan Yiqing, who was leading a team of internal guards, "Follow me to search Tuaner's residence." The 2 fat eunuchs saw the look of Shangguan Wanner before she left, and they nodded at the same time. The 2 of them held the punishment sticks in their arms and said to Wei Tuaner with a sharp voice, "Sister Tuaner, sorry to offend you." After that, the 2 of them squatted down and with a schwa lifted Wei Tuaner's skirt. Wei Tuaner was wearing silk panties. The pink panties were soft, smooth, and made of good quality material. They stuck closely to her perky buttocks. Because of the struggle just now, the silk panties had already slid into the seam of her buttocks, outlining the full curves of her buttocks. "No, I am not guilty, I am wronged. I want to see everyone, I want to see everyone." Wei Tuaner knew that they were going to use the punishment soon. She twisted crazily, but her hands and legs were firmly restrained by the 2 guards, and she could not move at all. In desperation, the 2 fat eunuchs tugged at her pants and forcefully pulled it down. With a rip sound, the 2 guards could not help but swallow their saliva. Tuaner's waist, which was twisting with all her might, was extremely soft and slender, but her buttocks were extremely plump, round, and perky. Her delicate and fair skin seemed to be carved out of ivory, and her 2 snow-white buttocks, which looked like a peeled egg, were arching up because of her struggle, like a perfectly round snowball. The two fat eunuchs stood up and looked at each other. They each took 3 steps back and raised the heavy punishment sticks in their hands at the same time. Wu Zetian's decree was swiftly carried out, and it was delivered to the residences of the crown prince and the princes. Although the crown prince and the other 4 princes are still young, they already have their own residences and corresponding guards after being conferred the title of crown prince and prince of Qin. Now, all these have been taken away. The crown prince, Li Qingqi, has been demoted to the title of prince of Shouchuan, and the king of Chu Lilongji has been demoted to the title of prince of Linzi. The princes immediately left their residences according to the decree and rushed to the East Palace in the carriages prepared by the palace guards. Their residences are next to each other, and the decree from the palace arrived at the same time. Therefore, when they entered the palace and rushed to the East Palace, they arrived almost at the same time. Alighting from the carriages, the 5 youths gathered in front of the East Palace. Although the 5 of them had different mothers and were usually raised by their own nannies in their own mansions, the brotherly bond between them was very thin. But this time, when they gathered together, although they were secretly humiliated and indignant, they did not dare to show it in the slightest. When their gazes met, there was a feeling of blood being thicker than water. Li Qingqi opened his arms and embraced his 2 youngest brothers. The 5 brothers glanced at the towering Wanxiang Palace and leaned against each other as they walked towards the East Palace, where they were imprisoned. The setting sun shone on their slender figures, and they looked like 5 abandoned puppies. But when their figures disappeared into the deep and narrow tunnel, their eyes revealed a wolf-like glint. Uft, uft, pft. When Shangguan Wanner returned from Wei Tuaner's residence, the 2 fat eunuchs under Princess Feixiang were still carrying out the punishment. The heavy wooden plank hit Tuaner's rotting buttocks. Every time the plank hit, a splatter of blood would splatter. The blood splattered on their bodies and also on the bricks. Not only a puddle of blood formed under Tuaner's buttocks, the area within a radius of a few feet was dyed red. Fresh blood was seeping into the ground bit by bit. The 2 fat eunuchs were so tired that their faces were covered in sweat. The beads of sweat on their chins swayed and would fall into the pool of blood along with the large staves they swung down with all their might. However, their spirits were extremely excited. Initially, because the one being beaten was the head steward of the inner palace, the 2 of them were still a little fearful. But after a few rounds of beatings, they became more daring, and the strength of their hands became heavier and heavier. They were incomplete men and could no longer use normal methods to vent their desires. So this kind of abuse gave them a special kind of pleasure. Watching the round and cute snowball-like buttocks being smashed by the big sticks in their hands until they were badly mutilated, and listening to Wei Tuaner's miserable screams that turned from shrill to moaning, they felt a great sense of satisfaction. Wei Tuaner no longer had the strength to struggle. In fact, she was already on the verge of death, and her mind was in a trance. Her body would only twitch instinctively when the wooden planks hit her. She was still mumbling, spare me, I've already confessed, spare me." But her voice was so low that only she could hear it. Shanghai Wanner's gaze fell on Wei Tuaner's badly mutilated buttocks. Her pupils suddenly shrank. A kind of fear and reluctance quickly flashed across her eyes. She slightly frowned and gently raised her hand to stop the 2 eunuchs from torturing her. She said to them in a low voice, "She still hasn't confessed?" One of the eunuchs pulled up his sleeve to wipe the sweat on his forehead, cheeks, and chin. He panted and said, "Return to the system. She has already confessed." Shanghai Wanner blurted out, "Who is it?" The eunuch was just about to answer when Shanghai Wanner suddenly said, "Forget it. It's fine as long as Her Majesty knows." After Shanghai Wanner finished speaking, she looked at Tuaner, who was already in a daze, and said with some pity, "Is this what everyone wants?" The eunuch said, "Yes. Everyone has ordered that she should be beaten to death. There's nothing I can do." Shanghai Wanner was silent for a moment. She said, Everyone is angry, so it's inevitable that there will be some resentment. Tuaner may have done a lot of wrong things, but she's still very attentive when serving everyone. No one can accurately grasp the weight of the cane. I'll have to trouble eunuch to put some thought into it. After all, we've worked together. The fat eunuch hurriedly said, yes, yes, yes. Since it's the system's order, I'll definitely obey. Shanghai Wana sighed again. She couldn't bear to watch any more. She turned around and walked into the hall of flying fragrance. The two fat eunuchs behind her exchanged glances and raised the wooden cane in their hands high. This time they were not aiming at Wei Tuaner's buttocks, but the back of her head. Puff! There was a dull sound, as if a watermelon had been smashed with a palm. Shanghai Wana suddenly stopped and straightened her back as if she had been electrocuted. But her body only paused for a moment before she quickened her pace and walked into the hall of flying fragrance. The back of her neck was chilly. Chapter 395. In the hall of fragrance, there was a pavilion cleverly separated by screens, antique shelves, lamps, and gauze curtains. Inside the pavilion, Wu Zetian was talking to a parrot. Recently, the parrots in the palace had changed too frequently. Although this parrot could talk, it had not learned the few words that Wu Zetian liked to hear the most. It needed to be taught again. Wu Zetian taught it a few times, and the little parrot suddenly learned a sentence. Although its pronunciation was strange and not very accurate, it already had a little taste. Wu Zetian couldn't help but feel happy. She smiled and said, "Haha, this little guy is very clever." Several female servants beside her quickly smiled and nodded. These were the female servants whose status in the palace was second only to Wei Tuaner. Usually, even if they were very close to Wei Tuaner, it was not easy for them to serve in front of Wu Zetian, because they did not dare to. Now that Wei Tuaner had collapsed, they all had the opportunity to replace Wei Tuaner. Naturally, they all found some reasons to run in front of Wu Zetian to deepen the emperor's impression. Wu Zetian smiled and turned around. She saw a palace maid holding 1,000 wen in her hand. She couldn't help but ask, "This little guy, is it still not willing to get along with the parrot?" The little palace maid hurriedly squatted down and said, "Everyone, this cat is now very obedient. As long as Steward Wei is here, it will not dare to eat the parrot." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered that Wei Tuaner had just been punished. Her words seemed to be claiming credit for Wei Tuaner. A few female officials at the side were already looking at her strangely. She couldn't help but turn pale with fright. Wu Zetian didn't care about this. She just shook her head and slowly said, "This is not good. It is because it is afraid, not because it doesn't want to eat." When Wu Zetian said this, she saw Shanghai Wana walking in quickly. She stopped and said, "You can leave. I want to talk to Wana." As she said this, she stretched out her hand and took the 1,000 wen from the little palace maid. The female servants and the palace maids quietly left. Wu Zetian held the civet cat and slowly walked in the hall with Shanghai Wana. Shanghai Wana reported, "There are a large number of house deeds, land deeds, and city books in Tuaner's room, as well as gold, pearls, jade, and other things. Because the number is too large, it is difficult to count for a while. Wana has already sent people to make a book for everyone to check. In addition, the young supervisor of the servants' administration had a large number of valuables and tried to escape from the palace. Was also caught. He has always been Tuaner's favorite person. Everyone, do you want to interrogate him? There's no need, just execute him." The smile on Wu Zetian's face disappeared. She gently stroked the fur of the 1,000 wen in her arms and whispered, "I already know who is playing tricks." Shanghai Wana bowed her head and said yes. Wu Zetian was silent for a moment and said faintly, "Wana, my left hand wants to cut off my right hand. What do you think I should do? Can I cut off my left hand as a punishment?" Shanghai Wana didn't answer, and Wu Zetian didn't want her to answer. They were silent for a long time, and then Wu Zetian let out a long sigh. Alas! Wu Zetian's sigh seemed to echo in the hall for a long time. Shanghai Wanner gently raised her head and looked at the back of Wu Zetian, who was slowly walking away. Her shoulders and back had always been very straight, and she always paid attention to maintaining the strict palace etiquette. But now her back was so bent that it couldn't be concealed. The civet cat and the parrot must be able to get along peacefully. When Wu Zetian walked to the entrance of the palace hall, she stood still and narrowed her eyes to look at the group of palaces illuminated by the blood-red setting sun. She said in an unquestionable tone, "Because that is what I want. What I want is omnipotent." The news from the palace was only learned by Yang Fan the next afternoon. Yang Fan was not an expert in officialdom and politics, but during these days in the palace he had always been in the most central place and could often see the emperor. Under the influence of what he saw and heard, although his experience was far from being comparable to that of the astute ministers, he could still analyze the profound meaning behind such a matter that had already been resolved publicly. Shaiman snuggled in his arms and gently peeled off the sparkling lychee. She picked it up with 2 slender fingers and put it into his mouth. This was the 6th lychee she had fed him. When the lychee entered his mouth, Yang Fan had already thought things through. He quickly sucked up the sweet juice of the lychee and said to Xiaoman, "I believe there will be results in the next 2 days, and those prime ministers who were wrongly imprisoned will also be released soon." Xiaoman was a bit confused. She didn't know why Yang Fan, who had his eyes closed all this time as if he was enjoying her gentle service, would suddenly talk about something completely unrelated to the current situation. She blinked her eyes and finally understood what Yang Fan was saying. She couldn't help but say in surprise, "It's not strange that the matter of Lang Jun will have a conclusion soon. But will it be so easy for those officials who have been labeled as traitors to be released from prison?" Yang Fan laughed quietly. He embraced Xiaoman's soft body and said in a low voice, "Of course, there are so many officials, and most of them are first-rate ministers in the court. Since they have been arrested and thrown into prison, there must be an explanation before they can be released. Otherwise, it would seem too childish." He gently rubbed the upper part of Xiaoman's firm buttocks and leisurely said, "But this staircase has never been a problem. As long as the emperor needs it, there will immediately be ministers who have figured out the emperor's will to build it for him. And this time it will be even simpler because someone has already wanted to build a staircase to lead the emperor down. He won't let go of this good opportunity." As he said that, Yang Fan looked at the beautiful sunset sky and thought of Zhao Yu. Zhao Yu, who had been planning to make a move, should have already started to do so. Yang Fan didn't know what kind of staircase Zhao Yu was planning to build for Wu Zetian, but he believed that the staircase had already been built. Xiaoman blinked and said, "Lang Jun is becoming more and more enigmatic. How come I don't understand what you're saying?" Looking at her raised, round chin and full, red lips, Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh. He intimately scratched the tip of Xiaoman's nose and said softly, "You don't need to understand. You just need to be cute all the time." Oh, Xiaoman was like a curious baby. She wanted to ask more, but Yang Fan's head had already slowly lowered. Xiaoman was becoming more and more familiar with Yang Fan's expressions and actions. She was a little amused and a little annoyed. She didn't understand why her Lang Jun liked the game of fighting with words so much. But as a good wife, she knew that she only needed to obey her husband. So she raised her head even higher and closed her beautiful eyes on her blushing face like a devout believer who was praying for God's blessing. Who wouldn't love such a little woman? So the gentle Yang Fan suddenly held the back of her head and kissed her fiercely. The little girl's cute tongue actually knew how to respond to him. Although it was still a little clumsy, it was enough to make him feel even more satisfied and excited. So his kiss became even more passionate. Soon, Shaiman closed her beautiful eyes and timidly allowed Yang Fan to domineeringly and passionately take and taste her. She no longer wondered why her elder brother was so passionate about the game of fighting with words. She also very immersed herself in hugging Yang Fan tightly. The two figures merged into one and gently fell on the mat under the flowering tree in the back garden. Wu Zetian came to Wuqing Hall after the morning court. Just as she sat down, Xiaohai came in to report that the school censor, assistant minister of Phoenix Pavilion, and supervisor of Phoenix Pavilion's Lantai, Li Zhaoda, had arrived. As soon as Wu Zetian heard this, she hurriedly asked someone to invite him into the hall. She gave him a seat and a cup of wine. Li Zhaoda thanked her for the seat and slowly sat down. Wu Zetian saw him sitting upright, full of spirit and vigor. His long beard was neatly trimmed and looked dignified. She couldn't help but happily nod. Li Zhaoda was originally ranked last among the prime ministers. Now, after the two political storms, the prime ministers were either dead, demoted, or imprisoned. This junior had become the head of the prime ministers in one fell swoop, second only to the empress and above millions. In the process, he had also fully demonstrated his ability to handle official affairs and his abundant energy and stamina. With so many official matters weighing down on him, Li Zhaoda handled them in an orderly manner. Everything was in line with Wu Zetian's wishes. He had already become Wu Zetian's most capable assistant. Li Zhaoda was in high spirits now. His colleagues like Di Renjie, Ren Jigu, and others were all sent to prison. Of course, he felt sad for them, but because of this, his prestige and status could no longer be restricted by anyone more senior than him. Looking at the imperial court, apart from the empress, there was only him, Li Zhaoda. Li Zhaoda reported to the empress several important matters that should be personally decided by the Son of Heaven, and he also provided his opinions for the emperor to consider. After some consideration, Wu Zetian agreed to each of them. Li Zhaoda also recommended Su Wei to the emperor, and Wu Zetian happily agreed. After the series of changes in the court, Wu Zetian had grown wary of her sons, nephews, and many of the ministers. On the other hand, Li Zhaoda, who did not conceal his emotions, was the most loyal and upright official in Wu Zetian's view. At present, no one could compare to him in the emperor's favor. After Li Zhaoda finished his report, Wu Zetian began to ask him about the preparations for sending troops to the 4 garrisons of Anqi. Recently, the court had been in constant turmoil, but Wu Zetian had never delayed this matter. Li Zhaoda was currently reporting to Wu Zetian about the preparations for the war against the 4 garrisons of Anqi. Inner attendant Count Zhe tiptoed into the hall. Seeing that the prime minister was in the middle of presenting a memorial, he obediently stood to the side. Wu Zetian had already seen him enter, but she paid him no heed. Only when she asked Li Zhaoda about the details of the situation did she cheerfully say, "With Zhaoda as our arm, we can now rest easy." Li Zhaoda bowed and said, "Your Majesty is too kind." However, he couldn't help but reveal a hint of pride. Wu Zetian smiled faintly, then looked at Zhu and casually asked, "What is it?" Zhu hurriedly stepped forward and took something out of his sleeve. He respectfully said, "Your Majesty, this subject has a copper report here. Please take a look." Chapter 396. Copper Bell Informants. We set up Copper Bell informants to listen to both sides, but over the years there have been many informants. Most of the informants are either groundless accusations that are proven to be false or trivial matters of the common people that need to be reported to the imperial court. We have grown tired of looking at them. Is there something special about them that you've specially reported to me? Wu Zetian's voice was a bit tired, and she seemed to lack interest in this matter. The Copper Bell was set up in the palace, the imperial court, and the bustling streets of the capital. It was like a modern reporting box. Periodically, someone would open it, sort out the informants inside, and then report them to the imperial court. Wu Zetian had originally set up the Copper Bell to attack her political enemies. As she had been walking step by step towards the throne, she had sensed with the sensitivity of a woman that many of the court officials harbored ulterior motives and were still loyal to Li Tang. If she wasn't careful, she could be consigned to eternal damnation. As a result, she had set up the Copper Bell to receive informants. At the same time, She had placed Zhou Xing, Lai Junqin, Sui Yuanli, and other ruthless officials in important positions. Based on the targets exposed in the Copper Bell, she had cleverly connected them and executed several hundred members of Li Tang's imperial clan and court officials, as well as countless officials below the rank of provincial governor. This was an important tool for seizing her political power. But now, the Copper Bell had lost its original use. Although Wu Zetian believed that there were still many officials with malicious intentions, she was confident that with the power she currently possessed and the powerful eyes and ears of the 3 law departments, there would be enough to deal with them. While the Copper Bell informants exposed wrongdoing, it had also become a tool for the various political factions to kill each other. As a result, it had been a long time since she had cared about the informants from the Copper Bell. Now, the more important Copper Bell informants were directly sent to the 3 law departments for processing. At present, Wu Zetian was old and didn't even have the energy to deal with memorials. How could she have the leisure to sort through the vast ocean of informants? However, even though the original purpose of setting up the Copper Centipede was to attack political enemies, it was not only cruel officials and treacherous officials who could use the Copper Centipede. Everyone could submit a letter. In the process, she could more or less have some objective understanding of the people's will. What she didn't know was that when she thought she no longer needed the help of the copper puppet, she was surrounded by even more disloyal officials, including the lackeys she had cultivated. Her ears and eyes had been completely shut off. This old lady, who lived high above the palace, could only get all her information from these people with different intentions. Zhezhu bowed and said, "Yes, this notice came from the imperial palace. Because of these 2 points, I feel that I should take out this report and report it to His Majesty alone." Wu Zetian was somewhat curious and asked, "What are the 2 points?" Zhezhu said, "The first point is that the identity of this informant is only an official slave, not even 10 years old. This subject finds it very strange. Another point is that the identity of the informant is not ordinary, so I feel that it is not appropriate to send it to the 3 law divisions." Wu Zetian frowned slightly. Displeased, she said, "Not even 10 years old and an official slave? What could a discontented child know? As an official slave, the so-called report is nothing more than to report that the 3 law divisions have enforced the law unfairly, to complain about the injustice of his father, brother, and family members who have committed crimes. We will not look at it. He does not believe in our 3 law divisions, but we do. Send him to the 3 law divisions to be punished." Zhezhu quickly glanced at Li Zhaoda. Li Zhaoda's eyes lowered slightly. Zhezhu gathered his courage and reported, "Your Majesty, the strange point is that this child is not complaining about the injustice of his father, brother, or family members. Rather, he is complaining about several ministers who have been convicted of crimes." Li Zhaoda interjected, "Haha, this is strange. Your Majesty, this old subject is also very curious about this mischievous child who is not even 10 years old. Since the Chamberlain has said so, there is no harm in your Majesty reading it to relieve your boredom. This old subject will also join in on the fun." Li Zhaoda stroked his beard and smiled. "I believe that if the 3 law divisions enforced the law strictly and impeccably, their reputation would not be tarnished by a single report." At the present time, the cooperation between Wu Zetian and Li Zhaoda was in the honeymoon phase. Wu Zetian was quite willing to listen to his words. Seeing that Li Zhaoda was also interested, Wu Zetian reluctantly said, "Since that is the case, bring out the report. We will take a look." Little Hai took the secret letter from Zhezhu's hands and presented it to Wu Zetian with both hands. Wu Zetian had only read half of the letter when her complexion changed. Her expression wavered for a long time before she asked in a low voice, "This child is currently a servant of the Sinon Temple?" Zhezhu replied, "Yes." Wu Zetian said, "Bring him to see us." Zhezhu's eyes flashed with a trace of joy. He promptly bowed and said, "As you command." Zhezhu bowed and withdrew. Wu Zetian slowly let out a breath and handed the secret letter to Li Zhaoda, saying, "Zhaoda, come and take a look." Li Zhaoda promptly stood up and took the secret letter from Little Hai's hands. He opened it and began reading. In fact, he had already known about the entire operation of the Sinong Temple's slave reporting the grievances of the ministers. In order to ensure that Wu Zetian would definitely receive this child, he had rushed to Wuqing Hall to meet with the Son of Heaven so that he could provide support at any time. The child who had reported was the son of Prime Minister Lu Sihui. Lu Sihui, the Prime Minister, had fallen very quickly. After Wu Zetian proclaimed herself as the Empress, she changed the era name. Before the 12th month of this year had passed, it had become a new year halfway through. After the turn of the year, Lu Sihui was appointed as the Prime Minister to replace Fu Yui, who had been dismissed due to his incompetence. In the end, he had only been the Prime Minister for half a year before Lu Sihui was executed for treason. The one who handled the case was Lai Junqin. All the women in Prime Minister Li's family were sent to the palace to be servants. His sons, who had already reached the age of 15, were all executed. Because this youngest son was still young and hadn't reached the age to be executed, he was sent to the Sinong Temple as an official slave. The result of Zhao Yu and the others' operation was to use this child to give Wu Zetian, who needed to solve this case of treason, a dignified way out. Li Zhaoda didn't have any relations with the hidden sect. However, when some officials looked for him and brought up this matter in a roundabout way, Li Zhaoda immediately agreed. Di Renjia, Renjigu, and the others were all core members of the Li Protection faction and were his accomplices. Of course, he had to protect them. It was just that he hadn't found a suitable opportunity yet. Now that he had this opportunity, he naturally wouldn't let it go. On the other hand, Li Zhaoda hated the ruthless officials of the 3 law divisions. Even if Di Renjia, Pei Sigu, and the others hadn't been imprisoned, he would still spare no effort in striking them down. Furthermore, the existence of the ruthless officials was a serious threat to him. Among the prime ministers that Wu Zetian promoted before and after her ascension to the throne, only he and Wu Qingxi hadn't been imprisoned. However, as long as these ruthless officials were still around, his good luck would eventually run out. Li Zhaoda had already discovered that one of the main reasons why he was able to remain unscathed in this series of political storms was because of his violent temperament. He always liked to stand up for the ruthless officials. Back then, when Wang Qingji led the people of the capital to petition to make Wu Qingxi the heir to the throne, he was the one who beat Wang Qingji to death. Later on, he was the one who secretly submitted a memorial causing Wu Zetian to remove Wu Qingxi from the position of Prime Minister. He was also the most blunt with the officials of the Ministry of Justice, the Supreme Court, and the Imperial Censorate. Of the 3 law divisions, the Imperial Censorate had the greatest influence. Back then, he had been the left minister of the Imperial Censorate and was Lai Junqin Sr. Now that he was the Prime Minister, he was the most courageous when the ruthless officials were running amok and everyone was afraid of being framed. His open conflict with the ruthless officials caused him to be marked in the emperor's heart. Even the emperor knew how terrible his relationship with the officials of the 3 law divisions was. This became his greatest protective umbrella. This was because the ruthless officials were well aware that there were 3 types of people that could not be easily offended, because offending these types of people would easily invite trouble for themselves. The first type were ruthless officials who were even more powerful than he was. These people were more skilled at manipulating people and could easily backfire on them. The second type were people that the emperor deeply trusted. What was emphasized here was trust, not importance. Those entrusted with important responsibilities by Wu Zetian naturally had to obtain Wu Zetian's trust. But the primary basis for this was their ability, and they might not necessarily be the person that Wu Zetian trusted the most. Being the most important and being the most trusted were 2 different things. Thus, the prime minister could be manipulated, but people like Xue Huai, Shanghai Wan and Wei Tuan who were especially close to Wu Zetian, had to be kept at a respectful distance. The last type was someone like Li Zhaoda. He had a particularly bad relationship with the ruthless officials, but the ruthless officials did not pull him down at the moment he began to shine. In fact, even the emperor was well aware of how bad their relationship was. If you wanted to mess with such a person, the emperor would easily see that you were abusing your position to avenge a personal grudge. Thus, even the old fox Di Renja had fallen into the hands of Lai Junchen, while Li Zhaoda had been actively bypassed by the ruthless officials in the midst of all the disturbances. Their plan was to weaken people like Li Zhaoda and clip his wings. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they did not want to have a direct confrontation with him. The things that they concocted could not stand up to scrutiny. What if the emperor investigated seriously because of Li Zhaoda's involvement in the case and found out that there was something wrong with them? Thus, they were not willing to easily add Li Zhaoda's name to the list of criminals that they concocted. Li Zhaoda was now a pile of smelly dog shit in the hearts of the ruthless officials. Unless it was absolutely necessary, no one was willing to step on his shoes. However, this favorable situation for Li Zhaoda would not last forever. Now that he was the head of the prime minister, a tall tree would attract the wind. If he wanted to avoid open spears and covert attacks, he needed to get rid of these ruthless officials for his own benefit. Thus, he could be said to have hit it off with those officials who wanted to launch another counterattack and rescue Di Renjia and the others from prison. Very quickly, Lu Sihui's son was brought in. Lu Sihui's son was now an official slave in the Sinalong Temple. The Sinalong Temple was in charge of the storage of grain, the management of the granaries, and the distribution of the salaries of the officials in the capital. This yamen was also within the boundaries of the imperial city and was not far from the palace. Wu Zetian looked at the delicate 9-year-old child kneeling in front of her and said in a dignified manner, "You are Lu Sihui's son? Child, you reported that Lai Junchen enforced the law unfairly and framed an official. Do you have any evidence?" Chapter 397. Lu Sihui's son was still young. Because of his young age, he had yet to develop a reverence for the emperor or a fear of the inviolable authority of the monarch. He only remembered that his father and brother had been killed by that scoundrel. If he could convince the emperor, then the scoundrel would be punished. He, his mother, and his sister would be freed from slavery and regain their freedom. The empress's question happened to be one of the 12 questions the official had prepared to rescue him and his family. This made him let out a sigh of relief. He did not need to improvise his answer to the empress's question. He replied in a clear voice, "I have no proof." This sentence was nothing. At that time, the whistleblowing system, including the impeachment system of the imperial censorate, allowed for a rumor to be reported. As long as you heard about it, you could report it. As for whether the matter was true or not, the yamen could investigate it. There was no need for you to provide proof. This was also one of the reasons why Wu Zetian gradually stopped paying attention to Tong Jie's whistleblowing. "The eaves of your house took up the space of my house. The cart of your stall took up the space of my stall." As long as people had the slightest personal grievance, they would fabricate a crime and report it. The messy and varied cases consumed a great deal of the yamen's manpower and resources. The investment and results were too disproportionate. However, his second sentence was not so pleasant to hear. He gathered his dantian qi and loudly said, "Just like how a young subject accuses a high-ranking official, there is no proof." Wu Zetian's expression immediately darkened. She pretended to be angry and said, "Little child, do you know what the punishment is for deliberately framing a high-ranking official?" The Lu family boy kowtowed and loudly said, "This subject has heard a rumor. Although there is no proof, it is not a false accusation. As for the crime, according to His Majesty's rules, even if a rumor report is not true, there will be no punishment. So this subject is not guilty." "Ha ha ha!" Wu Zetian laughed and turned her head to Li Zhaoda, saying, "Le Clan's child, you sure have guts." Li Zhaoda stroked his beard and said with a smile, "What courage can a child have? Presumably, He has heard of your Majesty's magnanimity and virtuous reputation of accepting honest advice. He has confidence in his heart, so he doesn't know fear." Wu Zetian turned her head and smiled at the surviving son of the Lu family. "All right, tell me, why did you accuse Lai Junqin of framing loyal people? Those people have already admitted their crimes." The child kowtowed again and said, "Doesn't your Majesty know that no one dares not to plead guilty in any case tried by Lai Junqin? Your Majesty can think about it. All these years, of all the cases that your Majesty handed over to Lai Junqin to try, has there ever been a case in which he was found innocent?" The smile on Wu Zetian's face gradually froze. She suddenly remembered that up until now, Yang Fan was the only person who walked out of the censorate with an innocent body. And Yang Fan was pardoned because of Princess Taiping's disturbance in court. Before that, he was also sentenced to death. The child continued, "Your Majesty can choose any loyal and devoted person at your side, including the Prime Minister sitting here, or your Majesty's most trusted subordinate, Shengguan Daiji. As long as your Majesty hands him over to Lai Junqin and says that you suspect that this person is rebelling, within 10 days, Lai Junqin will definitely be able to prove that he is really rebelling." Shangguan Wan, and Li Zhaoda subconsciously glanced at Wu Zetian. The frozen smile on Wu Zetian's face had already disappeared, and she became expressionless. She said slowly, "Little child, do you know that in the case of Di Renjie and the others rebelling, not only did we have the crime report personally written by them, but we also had the death request form written by them personally. Furthermore, we had also sent our messengers to investigate. They were indeed not tortured to extort a confession. You, who sent you here?" As she spoke, Wu Zetian's voice became harsher and harsher, but the child from the Lu family was like a newborn calf. He was not afraid of this tigress at all. He raised his head and said loudly, "Your Majesty favors Lai Junqin. How would I dare to tell you the truth? The ministers in the court and the common people all over the world. Who doesn't know that Lai Junqin has always used torture to interrogate people? He only hides it from your Majesty. Although your Majesty has sent people to investigate, does your Majesty think that the people around you will not collude with cruel officials?" If these words had been said before, perhaps Wu Zetian would only have laughed it off. But the case of Wei Tuaner bribing Wu Sanxi and framing the Crown Prince and Crown Princess had just happened. When the child from the Lu family said these words, they had great power. It was as if a giant bell had rung in Wu Zetian's heart, shaking her heart. She suddenly felt fear, a strong fear. She was the emperor and could only sit deep in the palace. She had to rely on the civil and military officials in the court to control the world. She had to understand the feelings of the people and the loyalty of the civil and military officials. She had to rely on the eyes and ears of the 3 law departments to understand the feelings of the people and the loyalty of the civil and military officials. If it was really as this child said, that the people around her had colluded with these cruel officials to deceive her, then a chill suddenly swept through Wu Zetian's heart. After a while, she used an attitude that was too serious for a child who had just turned 9 years old. She calmly said, "You have reminded me. Regardless of whether what you said is true or not, I have decided to pardon you and your family. I will return your family's confiscated mansion and property." The child from the Lu family was stunned. He suddenly kowtowed in ecstasy, tears streaming down his face. After all, he was a child and had forced himself to calm down for a long time. He had been carefully choosing the words that others had taught him to say to the emperor. Now that he and his family had been pardoned, he finally recovered his childish nature and burst into tears. Wu Zetian had Xiaohai take the child from the Lu family away. She said to Li Zhaoda, "This child will not lie. If this child from the Lu family is telling the truth, then it is too scary. Prime Minister Lai Junqin is the head of the law department appointed by me. I have also sent messengers to investigate Di Renjie's case. Do you think I can personally investigate this case?" Li Xiaoda's expression became serious. "This is against the law, Your Majesty." Li Xiaoda sat up straight and said in a loud voice, "However, the law cannot be above everything. All the rules made by the court are to protect its rule. If something has already endangered Your Majesty's country, Your Majesty should immediately intervene and not be restricted by the law. People make rules for themselves to prevent trouble, not to create trouble for themselves." "You are right." Wu Zetian stood up and said solemnly, Immediately draft the order. Have Wu Yi bring troops to the imperial palace and bring Di Renjie and his group into the palace. I want to personally interrogate them." Shangguan drafted the order. After Wu Zetian saw that there were no mistakes, she used the seal and ordered someone to pass on the edict to Wu Yi. Wu Qinghao immediately quieted down. Everyone was waiting quietly. Wu Zetian and Li Xiaoda sat facing each other without saying a word. Wu Zetian's mind drifted far away. She was thinking about a very serious problem. If even Lai Junqin, who she had raised up, could not be trusted, how could she ensure that her eyes and ears were clear? She had thought of all kinds of plans, but none of them were practical. Everyone had their own selfish motives. No matter how reliable a person was, if he was given great power, it was hard to guarantee that he would not deceive her for his own benefit. It seemed like the best way was to rebuild the Ministry of Justice. In the past, the Ministry of Justice had Zhou Xing and the Imperial Censorate had Lai Junqin. The two of them restrained each other and at least did not dare to be too lawless. Now that Zhou Xing was dead, Lai Junqin could cover the sky with one hand. This watchdog was about to be raised into an ingrate. Li Xiaoda was also thinking about a serious problem. How could he ensure his own benefits and power? Whether it was official or personal, he had to rescue Di Renjie, Ren Jigu, Pei Xingbin, and the others. However, if they were to be restored to their positions immediately with their qualifications and prestige, he would have to be demoted. "I need to put it aside," Li Xiaoda thought to himself. "I need to leave them in the cold for a while. Once I have settled down, I can come back." Li Xiaoda's furrowed brows relaxed slightly. Wu Zetian was thinking about her future plans. At this moment, she had already thought of a suitable candidate. She relaxed and raised her eyes to see Li Xiaoda's relaxed brows. She could not help but smile. "Xiaoda, you look thoughtful. Did you think of something?" Li Xiaoda's mind flashed. He hurriedly bowed and replied, "Yes. I was thinking about how the court should deal with the aftermath if the Lu family's words were true." Wu Zetian looked slightly surprised. "Deal with the aftermath? You mean?" Li Xiaoda smiled bitterly. "Your Majesty, the 3 prime ministers were imprisoned on the same day for conspiring against each other, and the news that they were going to be executed has spread throughout the entire capital. Now, with a light sentence of 'this is an unjust prison,' they are released. I am worried that this will have a major impact on His Majesty's prestige and the prestige of the imperial court." Hearing this, Wu Zetian's expression changed slightly. She immediately fell into a deep thought. Wu Zetian was silent for a while. She nodded slightly and said, "Xiaoda's thoughts are thorough. You are worthy of being a prime minister. I already know what to do." At this moment, the chamberlain, Xiao Hai, entered to report. He said softly, "Everyone, Wu Yi has been ordered to bring Di Renjie and the other criminals here. They are now waiting in the corridor." Wu Zetian stood up and said to Li Xiaoda, "Let's go. Today, I will personally interrogate them in front of the emperor. You, as the assistant minister of the Phoenix Court and the current prime minister, will be my witness." In the main hall of Wuqing Hall, there was already an imperial table with imperial silk in the middle. There were 2 small tables on each side. On the tables were the 4 treasures of the study. Behind the tables was a couch. There were also 8 chamberlains holding ceremonial axes, standing behind the table. Gao Ying and Lan Yiqing were holding the dragon and phoenix treasured fan, standing solemnly behind the table. Wu Zetian sat down behind the imperial desk and waved her hand. indicating for Shang Wanwaner and Li Zhaoda to sit behind the small tables on the left and right respectively. Shang Wanwaner, who was waiting to be executed, would act as the recorder, while Prime Minister Li Zhaoda would act as the recorder. She ordered in a deep voice, "Come, bring the guilty officials to the palace." Xiao Hai quickly walked out. Standing in the corridor, she announced the decree. Wu Yui brought 7 soldiers from the 100 Cavalry. Each one of them was escorting a criminal official into Wuqing Hall. After the incident, the 7 officials were the first to be arrested. After a month and a half, they were finally able to meet their emperor. Chapter 398. When Di Renjie and the others entered the hall, Wu Zetian's spirit was shaken again. She straightened her back and said in a clear voice, "You are rebelling. You have evil intentions. Your Majesty, we have been wrongly accused. Your Majesty, please clear this name for us." Di Renjie was not in a hurry. His voice was also very clear. The emperor was willing to personally summon them. This meant that the entire situation had already undergone a massive change. Although Di Renjie did not understand what was happening in the outside world from his prison, he could clearly see this, so his mood was not as urgent. "The confessions signed by you will be kept in the palace." Wu Zetian turned to Shanghai Wan-er and said, "Wan-er, read out their confession." Shangguan Wan-er picked up the confessions of Di Renjie and the others, and said in a clear voice, "Except for Wei Yuanzhong, the 6 of you have all admitted in your confessions that you are telling the truth. These are the confessions that you have personally signed." Di Renjie immediately said, "Yes, we did admit to our crimes, but we said, the revolution of the great Zhou dynasty, the reform of all things, the old ministers of the Tang dynasty willing to be executed, rebelling." We did not just say rebelling. Wu Zetian frowned and carefully thought about this sentence. She immediately heard the unwillingness and resentment in it. She asked little Hai to bring the confession over and carefully read it again. Sure enough, she found something strange. Their signatures ought to have been at the bottom right of the charge, but in this case the signature of the confession was immediately below the words, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." Di Renjie and the others had been officials for many years, so it was impossible that they didn't know these rules. They didn't pay attention to these details in the past, but now that Di Renjie said it, they carefully looked at the confession, especially the uneven edge on the left side of the confession. Obviously, this confession was cut after they signed it, and there should be a line of words at the front. Di Renjie said painfully, "Lai Junqian has a bad reputation, but when someone offends him, there is no escape. We are obviously innocent, but if we do not want to confess, we will use cruel torture. We are old and afraid that we will be tortured to death, so we are forced to confess. After that, I wrote a blood letter to complain to His Majesty." Ran Jigu immediately said, "If we really committed the great crime of rebellion, how could we just confess at the first trial and wait for death? Your Majesty, please understand." Wei Yuanzhong said with a voice as loud as a bell, "Your subject was determined not to admit it. In the end, Ho Siji immediately hung your subject upside down. If not for your subject taking advantage of his illiteracy and using the law against him, your subject's old body would have been hung for half a day before I breathed my last." Wu Zetian said gloomily, "Tell me, admitting to the crime is because you are afraid of being tortured, but I have sent the messenger Qi Feng to inspect the prison. Why did you all not complain to him about your grievances, but instead presented the death apology form, begging for a quick death? Moreover, when Qi Feng inspected the prison, he saw that all of you were carefree and relaxed. No one was being tortured." Di Renjie looked at Ran Jigu, Pei Xingbin, and the others, then said together, "We did not present the death apology form." At this time, Pei Xuanli also gathered his courage and kowtowed. "This subject does not dare to be disrespectful in front of His Majesty. Your Majesty, please allow this subject to take off my clothes. Your Majesty, please take a look at the numerous scars on this subject's body." Wu Zetian and Li Zhaoda looked at each other and said, "Granted." Then she said to Shanghai, pass the death apology form to them. Little Hai opened the death apology form and slowly walked in front of the 7 people. After Di Renjie and the others looked at the death apology form, they shook their heads and said, "This death apology form was not written by any of the 7 of us. Although the signature at the bottom was intentionally imitated, it is still different from this subject's handwriting. This is a forgery." The light in Wu Zetian's eyes narrowed. She said in a low voice, "Zhaoda, take a look." Li Zhaoda had worked with them for many years, so he was familiar with their handwriting. He carefully looked over it, then raised his head and said to Wu Zetian, "Your Majesty, of these 7 people's handwriting, this subject only recognizes the handwriting of Di Renjigu, Pei Xingbin, and Wei Yuanzhong. Not a single word on this death apology form is written by them." When Wu Zetian heard this, her tall and straight back slightly bent. She slowly closed her eyes. Di Renjie said with grief and indignation, "This subject is law-abiding and loyal to the dynasty. This subject has never formed a clique for personal gain. This time I have been falsely accused of treason, but I do not know the basis for this. Your Majesty might not know this, but in prison, this subject also had Magistrate Wang Desho, who instructed this subject to frame Ping Zhongyang Zhuro. He said that this would reduce this subject's punishment, and he would use this merit to rise to the top." When Di Renjie said this, tears were already streaming down his old face. Wei Yuanzhong was the right minister of the imperial censor and was also from the Ministry of Justice. He was the clearest about the matter of the petition in prison. He immediately glared angrily and shouted, "Your Majesty, Lai Junqin tampered with the confession and forged the death apology form. This is enough to prove that we have been wrongly accused." Pei Xingbin said, "Your Majesty said that you had sent an envoy to inspect the prison. We had originally been tortured and imprisoned, not seeing the light of day for a long time. Suddenly, one day, Lai Junqin forced us to change into new clothes and take a walk in the courtyard. We knew something was wrong and carefully observed. Sure enough, we discovered an angel patrolling from afar. We loudly cried out for our innocence, but unexpectedly, that angel hurriedly ran away. We wanted to cry out for our innocence, but there was no way to do so." At this time, Pei Xuanli had already taken off his clothes with the help of 2 young eunuchs. He said to Wu Zetian with tears in his eyes, "Your Majesty, please look at the torture this subject has suffered." Seeing the scars on his body, Shanghai Wanner could not help but let out a soft cry and covered her mouth. Ever since Wu Zetian ordered to stop the executions, Lai Junqin had already noticed that something was wrong and stopped using torture to extort confessions from them. However, the torturers' bodies were riddled with scars, and even now, they had not healed. Pei Xuanli slowly turned around and saw that there was not a single piece of uninjured flesh on his chest, back, and arms. His body was riddled with scars, and many of the wounds were still oozing blood. It was a frightening sight to see. Pei Xuanli said, "This subject's lower body is also riddled with scars. It is just that it is not suitable to examine them in front of Emperor. However, these scars are enough to prove that I am not lying." Wu Zetian slowly opened her eyes and looked at the new and old scars on Pei Xuanli's body. She slowly said, "My beloved subjects have suffered. I, as a woman, became the emperor. There are always some people in the court who are not reconciled to this. There are too many people who want to rebel. Therefore, I would rather make mistakes than indulge those who want to rebel. Lai Junqin has accepted Zhen's intention, peeped into Zhen's heart, flattered and fawned on Zhen's favor, but unavoidably made a few mistakes. You should remember that Su Jingye and Li Chong rebelled one after another. There were many members of the royal family and ministers in the court who secretly supported them. At that time, if it was not for Lai Junqin and the others who strictly handled the case and dug out these traitors, my country would have collapsed overnight. Wu Zetian's tone slightly paused before she continued. In this case, you were wronged because you have been too close to the Eastern Palace. You gave others false information and gave them something to use against you. From now on, you must reflect on yourselves. I am willing to live in peace with my subjects and rule the world together, as long as you are loyal to me, and to me, the Emperor. At this point, Wu Zetian turned to Shanghai Wanner and said, Ask the censorate to close the case. Send servants to escort the 7 people back to the residence. All the criminals are to be released and their confiscated property returned. When Wei Wang Wu Qingxi heard that the 7 people were to be released, he could not help but be greatly disappointed. He immediately rushed to the palace to see the emperor. Even though he knew that the emperor did not like to see him recently, if Di Renjie and the others were to be acquitted and their positions restored, he and the prime ministers would suffer a crushing defeat. Even if he had to brace himself, he still had to come forward. After Wu Zetian dealt with the case, she immediately returned to Flying Fragrance Hall to rest. Not long after, news came that Lai Junqin had entered the palace to ask for forgiveness. Wu Zetian did not see him and only ordered him to go back and await punishment before sending him away. Just as Lai Junqin left, Wu Qingxi arrived. With regards to Wu Qingxi's arrival, Wu Zetian did not seem to be surprised. After hearing someone's report, she only hesitated for a moment before ordering, "Call him in." Wu Qingxi hurriedly walked into Flying Fragrance Hall's bedroom and saw Wu Zetian lying on the high couch. Imperial Physician Shen was sitting on top of her, gently massaging her head. Wu Qingxi quickly went forward to greet the emperor. Wu Zetian closed her eyes and lightly said, "Sit. Why did you come to see me?" Just as Wu Qingxi sat down, he quickly leaned forward and said, "Aunt, nephew heard that Di Renjigu and the others have been acquitted." Wu Zetian softly made a sound of agreement and said, "What is it?" Wu Qingxi anxiously said, "Aunt, this is not appropriate. Even though it has been proven that Lai Junqin handled the case crudely and used pure torture to extort confessions, does this prove that they are not guilty? What was the secret letter that appeared in the East Palace about? If it was another capable official, he might have been able to find out the truth. It was true that Lai Junqin used torture to obtain evidence, but they did not give up and were determined to restore Li Tang's empire, so it might not be false. Aunt cannot assume that they were wrong just because Lai Junqin's testimony was not true. If Aunt let them go like this, I'm afraid there will be no end to their troubles." Wu Zetian lightly said, "We already have a plan. You don't need to say anything more." Wu Qingxi angrily said, "Aunt is compassionate, but I'm afraid they will think that Aunt is weak and easy to bully. Moreover, even though Lai Junqin's methods are a bit rough, he is incomparably loyal to Aunt. If Aunt does this, I'm afraid that if there are people with bad intentions in the future, the 3-Law Division will have misgivings and won't dare to go all out. We already have a plan." Wu Zetian emphasized again as if she had a terrible headache. She furrowed her brows and waved her hand, saying, "We are very annoyed. Don't be noisy. Go." Wu Qingxi saw that Wu Zetian's face was full of impatience and wanted to say something, but stopped. He could only stand and say, "Yes. Then nephew will take his leave." Wu Qingxi bowed and left. Wu Zetian let out a long sigh and thought to herself, "The one who framed the crown prince and used the curse to harm me was Sansi, but who was the one from the East Palace who framed the prime ministers? Did Sansi's plan fail and use another one?" Looking at Qingxi's impatience, perhaps it was his doing? Wu Zetian thought about it, and the more she thought about it, the more annoyed she became. She couldn't help but wave her hand. Imperial Physician Shen saw this and quickly stopped. Wu Zetian was quiet for a moment and called out. Tuan the palace eunuchs who were waiting on her left and right looked at each other. After a while, the new head of the palace's female officials, Luo Zi, bowed and answered. "Everyone, Wei Tuan colluded with foreign officials and framed the crown prince. She has already been beaten to death by everyone. Oh, Wu Zetian lightly patted her forehead and laughed bitterly. She murmured, "I'm old, really old." She sighed and said to Luo Zi, "Zi, go to the Hall of History and tell Wanner that after tomorrow's morning court, call the left minister of Yulin, Yang Fan, to Wuqing Hall to see the emperor." Chapter 399. The news that Di Renjie and the others were acquitted quickly caused a sensation in the court. All along, none of the officials who had been caught and sent to the imperial envoy station had been able to walk out safely. Although there was already Yang Fan before Di Renjie and the others, Yang Fan's special relationship with Princess Taiping had already spread far and wide. Everyone knew about it, so everyone treated him as a special case. It wasn't until Di Renjie and the others were all acquitted that the officials began to take it seriously. Some of the more sensitive people felt that Lai Junqin, who had always been favored by the emperor and relied on as an arm, might be out of luck. Some of the more knowledgeable people had already seen the distant future from this matter. They felt that the empress's ruling policy seemed to have changed. Wu Zetian had always dealt with matters swiftly and decisively. The next morning, during the morning court session, she officially announced the results of this matter. She also announced the appointment and adjustments of some of the important officials of the imperial court. In the imperial edict, Wu Zetian said that Di Renjie, Ren Jigu, Pei Xingbin, and the others were closely associated with the Eastern Palace. As court officials, they befriended the crown prince. They were suspected of forming a clique for personal gain and had failed their duties as officials. This time, they were implicated in the Eastern Palace's petition case because they didn't know how to behave and left behind information that could be used against them. Therefore, although it had been found out that the rebellion case had nothing to do with them, these officials should still be punished. She demoted Di Renjie to be the magistrate of Pengze, Ren Jigu to be the magistrate of Jiangxia, Pei Xuanli to be the magistrate of Yiling, Wei Yuanzhong to be the magistrate of Fuling, and Lu Xian to be the magistrate of Xishan. These prime ministers, ministers, and assistant ministers were all sent to be magistrates. In addition, because the letters found in the manors of Prime Minister Pei Xingbin and Provincial Governor Li Xijin were found to ridicule the current politics and slander the emperor, the two were convicted of disrespect. They were stripped of all their official positions, and their families were exiled to Lingnan. As for Lai Junqin, because of his simple and crude handling of the case of rebellion, using torture to extort confessions, violating the law while enforcing the law in order to gain merit, he also connived with his subordinates to fabricate false evidence. For this reason, he was removed from his position as the left minister of the imperial censor and demoted to Tangzhou military adjunct. Soon after, Wu Zetian issued a few new appointments to the vacated positions of the demoted officials. Among them, the one that attracted the most attention was the position of the prime minister. However, the appointment of the prime minister was already known to everyone before the emperor issued the edict. Now that they heard the edict, they knew that Li Xiaoda would be the head of the prime minister. Yang Zhiro, Su Weiwei, and the others would be the assistants to assist Li Xiaoda in presiding over the court. As for the appointments of officials below the minister and assistant minister level, the emperor did not directly issue an edict in court. These matters were assessed and arranged by the Ministry of Appointments and reported to the emperor for approval. It was precisely these positions that people were unable to predict in advance. Thus, when the morning court was dismissed, many officials began to make their own calculations. Some wanted to find official positions for their children and nephews. Some wanted to advance themselves, and some wanted to promote their own power. Thus, the officials in charge of the Ministry of Appointments immediately became busy. Those with high positions of power and authority began to beat around the bush, conferring titles and making wishes. Their colleagues who were of equal power began to express their goodwill and invite them to banquets. As for those with lower positions, they began to prepare greetings and gifts. Ren Jigu, Pei Xuanli, and the other officials who were demoted and exiled could not help but hang their heads in dejection and silence. Some were happy and some were sad. Di Renjie was really broad-minded. Although he had been demoted from the prime minister to a small county magistrate in an instant, he was not shocked by the praise or humiliation. He was very calm. When some officials who were on good terms with him came up to him to express their condolences, he only smiled and responded, without the slightest hint of depression. In this case of rebellion, there were too many high-ranking officials below the prime minister, minister, and assistant minister level. Thus, very few people paid attention to how the main character, Yang Fan, would be arranged. In reality, with his fifth-level official position, although it was not considered small in the local area and could be on equal footing with a provincial governor, it was not considered large in Luoyang, where there were many officials in the capital. He was not on the list of officials to be appointed and removed by the emperor in court, and he also had to wait for the Ministry of Appointments to appoint him. The officials who were racking their brains for the vacant positions and currying favor with each other did not expect that at this time, Yang Fan was already standing outside Wuqing Hall, quietly waiting for the emperor's arrival. It was often said that only after experiencing women could a boy become a man. Marriage, on the other hand, would cause a man to quickly mature. Because he was the sole person in charge of the household, he had to play the role of his father and grow into a towering tree to shelter his family from the wind and rain. Then what about imprisonment? The experience of narrowly escaping death and the torment of separation between life and death could cause a man to quickly grow up. Sometimes there would be a rebirth, a change that was tantamount to a new life. Yang Fan had just got married when he was arrested and thrown into prison. He was almost sentenced to be hanged. This series of experiences had already caused this young man, who had just turned 20, to possess a valuable wealth that was very difficult for his peers to obtain. It was the tempering of his will, the growth of his character, and the maturation of his wisdom. In the past, Yang Fan always had a sunny smile on his face. He stood there as straight as a spear, giving off a feeling that he was showing off his abilities. At a glance, people would notice this energetic, handsome, and confident young man. Now, there would still be a smile on his face, but that smile was restrained and reserved. It was no longer as bright as the sun, but as gentle as the moonlight. His back was still straight, but he no longer showed off his abilities like a spear. Instead, he was like a sword, a sharp sword hidden in a sheath. Was handling memorials in the Hall of Martial Accomplishment. She should already know that Yang Fan was outside the door, but she did not use any excuse to come out and take a look. She also did not use any excuse to call Yang Fan into the hall to have a quiet chat with her. Even though she very much wanted to, Yang Fan also did not impatiently ask about her situation from the mouths of the palace maids and servants who came in and out. He had already learned patience. Sometimes patience at the right time could lead to a longer reunion. He now understood this principle. In the distance, the bell for the dismissal of the court rang out. Yang Fan turned around and faced the divine palace of Wanxiang. He didn't have to wait too long. The emperor's procession quickly appeared under the escort of the guards of honor. The procession went all the way into the third courtyard before it was gently lowered. Wu Zetian stood from the procession. Yang Fan waited until Wu Zetian walked in front of him before he bowed and said, "Subject Yang Fan greets your majesty." Welcomes everyone. At this time a soft and pleasant voice suddenly rang out beside him. Yang Fan's heartstrings suddenly trembled, but he didn't turn his head to look at her. Wu Zetian calmly glanced at Yang Fan and ordered, "Follow me in." Finishing, she stretched out her hand. She had support her as she slowly walked into the Hall of Martial Accomplishment. Yang Fan straightened his back and followed behind her. Only now did his gaze land on Wan wore a moon-white man's robe embroidered with bamboo branches. Her long and beautiful neck was as elegant as usual. However, when his gaze landed on Wan waist, he found that her swaying waist was a bit too slender. The jade belt around her waist made it hard to hold it. As the belt became wider, Wan became thinner. Wan seemed to sense Yang Fan's gaze. Her back became slightly stiff. She supported Wu Zetian all the way to the imperial desk and then let go. Taking advantage of the opportunity, when Wu Zetian leaned over to sit, she turned her head and quickly glanced at Yang Fan. Yang Fan had been watching her the entire time. Turned her head and met his deep gaze. Yang Fan looked at those eyebrows that were like willow leaves, those eyes that were like red phoenixes, those cheeks that were like fresh lychees, that nose that was like goose fat, and that gaze that quickly moved away as if it was scalded. Yang Fan's heart ached slightly. Er's lips, which were as fresh as preserved fruit, gently pressed together. She quickly turned her head and stood by the side of the imperial desk. She didn't dare to look too long. She was afraid that Yang Fan would see the sorrow in her heart. Wu Zetian coughed softly and said to Yang Fan, "Yang Fan!" Yang Fan quickly gathered his thoughts and stepped forward. With his hands hanging down, he said, "Your subject is here." Wu Zetian looked at Yang Fan. Her left hand reached out and gently took the cup of fermented rice that Wana handed over. She brought it to her lips and gently took a sip. She slowly said, "You were falsely accused and imprisoned. Do you have any resentment towards me?" Yang Fan quickly said, "Thunder and rain are all the benevolence of the monarch. I am your Majesty's subject. How could I dare to have any resentment towards your Majesty? The reason why I was unjustly imprisoned was because I was not virtuous enough. That was why I was taken advantage of by vile people. Fortunately, your Majesty is wise and clears my grievances. From now on, I will reflect on myself and serve the court." Wu Zetian smiled and said in a low voice, "The security of the palace cannot be relaxed for even a moment. When you were imprisoned, your position was taken by someone else. This general works seriously and is loyal to his duty. Even though it has been proven that you are not at fault, I cannot remove him from his position without fault. So, I will have to make other arrangements for you." Her fingers had been gently tapping on the table. After she finished speaking, she gently raised her eyes and looked at Yang Fan, who was standing with his head down. She smiled and said, "Princess Taiping's manor is still lacking a senior official. There has never been a suitable candidate. Are you willing to accept the position?" When her fingers lightly tapped on the table, Shanghai Wan-er's eyebrows involuntarily jumped a few times. Her hands and her sleeves suddenly clenched tightly. Her fingertips pierced into her palms, but she did not feel a trace of pain. She wanted to turn her head and give Yang Fan a stern warning, but she used all her strength and her neck was so stiff that she could not move at all. It was not an easy task to express one's feelings in front of Wu Zetian, senior official of the Princess Manor. Why would the emperor think of this position? Yang Fan was very surprised. His heart quickly surged with a kind of bad premonition. Then he saw Wan-er's face. Wan-er was standing sideways. The lines of her beautiful face were very soft and beautiful. But he who had skin to skin with Wan-er keenly felt the fear and nervousness hidden under that calm expression. He immediately bent down and said in a low voice, "If your Majesty has any orders, I will bow my head and obey. It is just that it is not that I am belittling myself. In reality, the responsibility of the senior official of the Princess Manor is too great. I am young and inexperienced. I am afraid that my ability is not enough and I will fail your Majesty's expectations. So, I do not dare to accept orders.